So both of these stories happened to me, and the first happened back in 2004, while the second, more recently in 2018. I guess I am what people would call a non-believer in the paranormal. I personally believe that if things are looked at with a critical eye, then usually an explanation can be found. However, sometimes things, well, they simply cannot be explained, as I've found out. Although I still don't believe, I'm more open to the idea, I guess, that we don't fully understand our universe, and the very real possibility that strange occurrences can be explained by, well, something even more terrifying than simply a ghost or a spirit. I'm talking about the fact that even mainstream science is starting to consider alternate dimensions and other realities that run parallel to our own. Now, with that being said, here's what happened. So back in 2004, I was a police constable working for Central Scotland Police. Back then, the Scottish police forces were segregated into constabularies and force areas. Grampian Police covered Aberdeen and the northeast. Strathclyde Police covered Greater Glasgow, with Lothian and Border Police covering Edinburgh, and the Scottish borders too. Which means that in total, there were 8 such regions. Central Scottish Police meant that we covered Falkirk Area Command, Stirlingshire, and Clackmanshire as well. This was all prior to 2013, when all such policing areas were united to create what is now Police Scotland. Anyway, so it's summer of 2004 and it's my night shift week. As it was midweek, there wasn't much doing in the rural area that we were patrolling, just driving around the small villages and country roads, waiting for a call to come in really. It was me and my partner, his name was Sid. It was around 4 a.m. when my radio squawked and it was dispatched with a silent 999 call which had originated from the Old Mill Inn. A silent 999 call is basically an emergency call placed by a person that doesn't speak on the other side. More often than not as well, these are kids who have just learned what to do in an emergency, and we often arrive at the location to a very embarrassed parent answering the door. Other times though, silent 999s could be someone in danger but they're afraid of talking, as can happen with a home invasion or a domestic violence situation, for example. Well, the Old Mill Inn was about 6 minutes away from our current location. En route, the dispatcher updated us that the call lasted for maybe 3 minutes and she could hear breathing and crackling on the line as well. So, we arrived at the inn, only to find it in complete darkness. It was a 2-story, built back in the mid-1800s. It's always been an inn with a pub and a function room on the ground floor and 4 rooms upstairs. Flicking on our flashlights, Sid and I agreed to move around the building to the rear in opposite directions, which we did, eventually meeting at the back, checking windows and doors as we went. After getting to the back door and realizing that the building is securely locked, Sid then radioed back to dispatch to firstly confirm the location and secondly check the records for any key holders on file. Almost instantly she responded and confirmed the exact location and then read out the address of the key holder, which she was dialing as we speak. As luck would have it too, the owner and the key holder of the inn lived in a bungalow right next to the inn, and within minutes we could see lights switching on in her home as she emerged from the front door. We explained to her the reason why we were there and that we would need entry to the property. She assured us that there were no guests booked in that night. In fact, there hasn't been any guests for the past few weeks. She unlocked the rear entrance as we made a methodical sweep of the bar and the restrooms. We went up the old stone staircase that leads to the second floor and to the rooms. One by one, we slowly creaked open the heavy doors and inspected each room. As we were conducting our search guided by the owner, she did explain that none of the rooms have access to an external landline phone. The only phone line in the building was the telephone situated behind the bar, which we promptly went back down to inspect. I lifted the receiver and heard a dial tone. Everything seemed pretty legit. Sid seemed to be dismissive of the situation, saying, "Oh well, everything's fine here." It was then, though, that I thought of something. I called dispatch on my radio and asked them to repeat the origin number of the call and the details. She came back saying that she heard breathing and possibly a muffled voice, which for some reason she believed to be a male person. She then repeated the telephone number. That's when I found out that the numbers, they didn't match. Overhearing this information, the owner's face suddenly went chalk white. You better follow me," she said. She then led us down another winding stone staircase, this time to the basement. This led us into the cellar where all the beer kegs and chilled drinks were stored. It was freezing cold down there, the perfect storeroom for such things. She stood by the doorway, almost reluctant to enter any further. She slowly pointed across the opposite side of the cellar where I could see a very old bureau sat. Bottom drawer was all she said. I slid open the heavy oak drawer and inside was a single object. It was an old yellow telephone. You know those old phones that had the rotary mechanism for dialing numbers? It looked like it had been there for years, and the once white plastic phone was now yellowed with age, with the cord wrapped around it. She explained that back in the 1980s there was a phone line down here, but it's been dead ever since. On the skirting board to the bureau, I could see the remnants of an old British telecom connection, though. In the center of the rotary mechanism was a weathered plastic holder with a phone number written on it. And it was the same number that the originating silent 999 call had come from. Now, this story could easily be embellished by me telling you, oh, someone died there back at like 4 a.m. back in the 80s, or there was a terrible fire and an old owner perished, or something like that. But I looked into it and none of that actually happened. In truth, I found it very spooky, as Sid just sort of laughed it off as some sort of crossed lines or fault with the phone system. But ever since then, and because of that, my nickname was now Mulder around the police station. We never did find out what happened with that 999 call, and it just never sat right with me, and to this day I still think about it. Now, back in 2018, my wife and I were moving into a larger home from our tiny 2-bedroom flat. Our new home is a cozy 4-bedroom, 2-story house with a separate lounge and dining room. And to say that we were excited is a huge understatement. That excitement, though, would soon wane with the lure of stress and disruption as we took on multiple projects like completely renovating the kitchen, laying carpets and wooden flooring, and even decorating the whole house. However, the good parts were the shopping. Shopping for all the new furniture, kitchen appliances, and all the cool stuff that would adorn our new home. And one simple word really makes this process so much easier: Amazon. Now, there's a small place in the north called the House of Bureau. This is basically a huge country retail establishment that focuses on the more luxurious items, I guess you could say. Sort of like country-style clothing, kitchenware, decor, and there's a large food hall too. And it was a place that we would always stop into if we were heading north. We would stop, have a small coffee, and we would move on, as it is very, very expensive there. As such, we found ourselves there to get some inspiration and some ideas for stuff to populate our new home. As an example, we found these coasters and placemats for the dining room. They were by a local artist and the designs were perfect. We made a note of the items to search on Amazon later. And now, this might sound a bit pretentious, but I always wanted a teaspoon rest. This is nothing more than a sort of small ceramic dish that would, well, hold a teaspoon and prevent you from staining the worktop. We were big on tea here in Scotland, and of course, as disgusting as it sounds, We use the same spoon over the course of a day, and therefore a small spoon rest is just the ticket. I had found this super cool teaspoon rest as well. It had a sort of ink-style depiction of the Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland. After checking the price tag, which wasn't that expensive in the grand scheme of things, I searched Amazon and found the exact one way cheaper. And so, I quickly added that to the basket. Once home, I also found the artistic coasters and placemats that we saw earlier on Amazon and ordered them along with my teaspoon rest. Order confirmed. Expect delivery in 1 to 2 days. While we await the magical Amazon elves to somehow get our items picked, packaged, and shipped to us, we still had a lot of work to do. The kitchen was getting completely ripped out and a new one was installed. Thankfully, the contractors assigned are doing both, so we didn't need to worry about overlap. The next day, demolition began, and we were standing in the dining room eyeing various paint swatches when the doorbell rang. Upon answering it, I was greeted with the delivery guy, who I recognized as he's been here before. He spoke with an accent which I suspected could be Eastern European, but that's really not that relevant. He beeped the box and handed it to me before wishing me a good day. I took the box into the dining room to join my wife as we excitedly ripped open the cardboard. It was the really nice placemats, and somehow they looked even better than last time that we saw them. As I removed all of the packaging and the filler from the box, I was sad to see that my teaspoon rest wasn't there. I quickly opened the Amazon app and saw that both items were flagged as delivered. I was about to go off annoyed, but suddenly the doorbell rang again. I opened it to the same, albeit this time out of breath, delivery guy, and he said, "Oh, sorry, I left this one in the van," as he handed me a smaller box. I thanked him and rejoined my wife in the dining room, and it was the teaspoon rest. It's in the shape of a teapot, white ceramic with the Mad Hatter inked onto the middle. Kind of looks like the old China-style porcelain from back in the day. Later that afternoon, my mother-in-law arrived simply to check on the progress and have a cup of tea or two. Like I said, we're Scottish and we're all about tea here. I excitedly showed her our new placemats and teaspoon holder, and then after what seemed like an eternity, she left. I packed away the mats and the teaspoon holder into the box, and I took it all upstairs. Now, all of our kitchen-bound stuff was being kept upstairs in the front room, awaiting the kitchen being completed. About a week or so later, the kitchen was finally done. It was time to start filling in with our new appliances and general knickknacks and all that. And in the process of doing this, I noticed that the placemats and the teaspoon rest, that they were missing. In fact, even the box that I had them in was gone. Now, no one, and I mean no one, has access to that room, bar for me and my wife. And it was a puzzle. But not to worry, I mean, we probably just moved it, or maybe we misplaced it or something. Well, after hours of searching everywhere, and I mean absolutely everywhere, even the wheelie bins in the garden, the box and its contents were just gone. And I mean, it made no sense. How could we misplace them like that? I even called my mother-in-law and told her about it, and she said that she distinctly remembers seeing them. Well, later that morning, we were back in the dining room as painting was about to start, and just then the doorbell rang. I answered, and it was an Amazon delivery guy. The same Amazon delivery guy that we had seen many times before, and the one who had been here last time. He handed me a box and then sort of beeped it with his scanner machine before bidding me a goodbye. Now, we had been ordering a whole bunch of stuff for the house, so this was not unusual. What was unusual, however, is when I rejoined my wife in the dining room and with her saying, "Oh, what is it?" I just sort of stood back in shock. She said, "What? What's wrong?" She then looked into the open box, and It was the placemats, the same placemats. And just as we were saying to each other, how the heck did this happen? The doorbell rang yet again. I answered the door, and I remember feeling my nose burning as tears began to fill my eyes and hairs literally stood on the back of my neck as a smiling, out-of-breath delivery guy from before said those words. It was my teaspoon rest. I frantically opened the Amazon app, and next to the 2 items were the words, "Delivered today." Now, here's the thing. Since 2018, we have discussed this several times between ourselves and my mother-in-law, and what makes this whole thing even stranger is the fact that, although these are the placemats and teaspoon rests that we ordered, the designs on them somehow seem different, but only small details, like the position of the Mad Hatter and the way that he's facing is a little different. Now, I said at the start that I'm not what you would call a believer, but even with a logical mindset, I still cannot fathom how these occurrences took place like this. And to this day, I have no idea how to explain either of them. So I want to share an encounter that I had in September of 2012 in some French woods. I am still haunted by this creepy encounter, and I have a hard time accepting that I may be unable to know exactly what this creature really was. So I was 20. I was in an old and small truck with an older friend, a 55-year-old guy who was the driver. I was sitting in the passenger seat on the right of the truck. The truck, it was pretty old, and I remember that we couldn't go faster than like 30 or 40 kilometers an hour. We had been driving for some time, and we took the only very small road in order to stop somewhere that we wanted to visit. It was an old church or an abandoned house or something. We also visited a German fortification. We were expecting to arrive at our destination, a house that belonged to a friend of mine, and it was around 3 a.m. or so in the morning. We were running late though, and it must have been around 3 in the morning when we entered a huge dark forest on the way. We were driving slowly in the woods on a straight and small road. The old lights of the truck, they were some kind of blinking yellow light, and at one point I saw some very black sort of thing, an outline, on the left side of the road. It was a very clear outline though, because it was in the light of the truck, and otherwise I probably wouldn't have seen it. But that's when I noticed that the creature was on 2 legs, or it was bipedal. No tail, and at first I couldn't see any arms, but as we were slowly approaching this thing, I saw it turn its head in our direction. We were both silent in the truck, saying no words. My friend was just sort of driving, and honestly at first I wondered if I was hallucinating from being so tired. We slowly drive in its direction, and it sort of strutted across the road as it was staring at us. It had big yellow eyes though, like an owl almost, and it must have been around almost 2 meters tall. We were almost where it was now, and I remember fearing that it might open my truck door and try and grab me. Genuinely, I was pretty scared by this thing. I then saw an arm swinging along its thin black hairy body. Yeah, it had hair on all of its body. I saw an outline as we approached it, but as I got closer I saw this. It arrives on the other side of the road and suddenly stops and turns in our direction. It was still staring at us too. A few seconds later we passed it, and I didn't move my head, just looking right at it in the rearview mirror the whole time, seeing that it was staring at our truck, letting us drive away from it. My friend and I, we didn't say a word, and half an hour later we drove out of the dark woods, and I said something like, "Well, weird things in the woods, right?" And my friend was suddenly extremely nervous, saying, "Yeah, did you see that? What was that?" We talked about it, and allegedly, He saw the same thing as me and thought that he was hallucinating as well because he was tired. But no, we saw that thing in the woods. Today he's 60 and I'm in my 30s, and we both still remember it and are still haunted by whatever this thing was. We talk about it every time that we meet each other, and he is particularly marked by the intelligence that its big yellow eyes seem to have. And look, I am an urbexer since like 2004, and I visit the catacombs of Paris like every 2 months. I've seen some weird stuff during my explorations too, but I've never really feared anything. But this thing, whatever it was, it truly scared me. Anyway, one day I found a picture on the internet, and sadly I didn't find the artist and there was no context, but this is pretty much what it looked like, what I saw, except for the eyes. They were much bigger and rounder and they were yellow, but apart from that, this is pretty much exactly what we saw that day. I've had my fair share of weird, unexplainable experiences since I was a kid. There's the usual stuff, mostly hearing voices calling your name, or having a dream that within a few days comes true, or thinking of someone or something for the first time in a long while, and suddenly they or it either comes up as a topic or shows up in life. All things that I could write off as my imagination, or just overthinking things. But there is one experience that haunts me to this day, and it's when I worked as a security guard at an old school ground in New England. This was around the start of COVID's quarantine, so no one knew what to do entirely. I remember it was either March or April, the weather was warm and quarantine was only just being enforced, and since the school was a dorm-based campus, this meant that all the students had to leave. I'd been working there since like December, so I was used to how lively the school was, and seeing it so empty just made me feel uneasy. What once was a school with some old buildings, and mostly new ones with students who were excited for their sports and their friendships and dramas and all that, was now a small ghost town practically, with no signs of life except for our security guards, which only one of us was on campus at a time as well. Every day I'd have to make 2 rounds around the entire campus, going through the old buildings and the new ones, checking every dark corner. For the older buildings, we have 8 student dorms, 1 adult dorm that showed signs of abandonment on the upper floors, overturned beds and such, an old set of condos turned into offices for upper staff, an old house turned into the office space, a church, the boathouse, the library, and the old school building. For new buildings, there was the rec center, the sports center, the science building, and the arts building. When kids were on campus, it wasn't so bad, but when the campus was empty, the school just didn't feel like a school anymore, I guess. It felt, well, dead, and also like I was being watched. But not like I'm being watched by students, but by something else. Something that I figure didn't want me there. So, the sun was still up but on the setting side, which is why I let my guard down, I think, as I mostly thought stuff like this happens at night. The science building and the old school building were connected, so I was crossing over from the newer building to the old one, and upon stepping foot inside, I heard something that I hadn't heard the prior rounds, let alone the prior days. Footsteps. Running footsteps. They were above me, so I called out and made my way upstairs to see who it was. But there was no one there, and I didn't hear footsteps going up or down. I was about to brush it off when I heard another set run above me, this time on the 3rd floor. I booked it upstairs, calling out, and when I got there was no one there. I checked the doors and the lights to see if I was going crazy. The lights were off though, and the doors, they were definitely locked. there was just no way that anyone could get inside, no way anyone could be running about. I instantly got chills and made a call then and there that I'd skip the old buildings, as places like the library made me feel really uncomfortable when the school was empty. I knew that I was going to get in trouble later, but it wasn't the first time for skipping places on my route. But something felt wrong, and I just didn't feel like messing around with whatever it was that day. So my next stop, that was the art center, the newest building. Something of note about the art center too is that there's a speaker system built into the building that plays music throughout it, whenever there are people on campus, that is. The last few tours I went through there, it was silent because obviously nobody was here. But today was different though. The moment that I stepped inside, I heard talking. Indistinct, but talking, as though two people are talking to each other somewhere inside of the building. The building was locked though. I knew that it was locked because I locked it personally. But I still needed to go and investigate anyways, no matter how much I hated myself for it. The lights inside, they were off, with the light from the setting sun seeping in at the right angles. Aside from the noise of talking, which I still could not make out, except for the fact that there were two voices, everything seemed normal. Then I made my way to the second floor, hoping that maybe I'd see who it was, but despite them most likely ignoring me, going hello security constantly. But the minute that I reached the top of the stairs, the voices stopped, and there was a loud, heavy slam. I nearly screamed and ran in that moment. Quite honestly, I really wanted to as well, but I knew that I couldn't afford to, or else I'd be in really deep trouble if someone was there. The area was very open though, which allowed me to track the source of the sound a little bit easier. It was a large, heavy door that we left unlocked due to it being easier to enter for our tours. It's the one room in the building that we keep unlocked because all that's really in there is chairs and tables and that, and some students would often use the room for clubs or watching movies on the projector. So I looked around the room. I made sure that nobody was there. However, just before I turned and I left, I saw something that I will never forget as long as I live. I saw a blue face looking back at me in a reflection. Whoever it was shorter than me, so I knew that it wasn't mine, and the look on its face, it looked like someone was struggling to breathe almost. Well, that was it. I ran and I decided to heck with this. I'm just not paid enough. I ended the tour early, having only done 3 buildings, spent the rest of my shift in the guard shack, watching the cameras for anything. I had hell to pay later when my boss came to take over my shift. He was really annoyed that I had skirted most of my shift, but once I explained what had happened and why I didn't do the entire thing, his face suddenly changed. The man was an old, stubborn British guy, but he never made that face before or afterward. But he told me 2 stories from the school's history. The first was his own experience of how, when the school was closed for the summer, he found himself cornered by what he called a presence in one of the older buildings. He wanted to turn around, but according to him, it felt like something was standing behind him, and if he did turn around, that he would regret it. Eventually, the presence left, and he ended his tour, and same mindset that I had. The second story, though, was about a pair of boys who were playing on the river by the boathouse. This was in the early 1900s or so, during the early days of the school. Apparently, a pair of boys were playing on a raft in the river when one of them fell off. I did some digging, and records indicate that the boy, unfortunately, had drowned. The other boy tried to get help to save his friend, but when they got back, it was too late. Obviously, I don't know if the boy's spirit is the blue face that I saw, but I knew that I saw something. I heard something. like I said earlier too, I've brushed off most of my weird and unexplainable experiences in my life as just my own imagination or maybe coincidences or whatever. But this one, I cannot shake off to this day. Something about that face burned itself into my memory, and all tours that I did after that had me paranoid and on edge. But thankfully, I never experienced another paranormal event there again. But it did make me realize just how much we've romanticized these experiences. And quite honestly, it disturbs me just how much we've done that. My husband joined the military back in 2012, when we got our first station in 2013. Shortly after working out at the military-based gym, I started to notice this creepy dude who was active duty, who would always show up at the same time that I did, and he would just stare at me and smile. He was tall, athletic build, balding a bit, a little bit nerdy looking, and I would guess in his 30s. I personally was in my 20s at the time. He ended up approaching me a few times trying to make some small talk, but I told him how my husband was on active duty, hoping that he would get the hint. I realized that I never asked this guy's name and he never gave it to me either. I really didn't care to know though because, he creeped me out. This though, as I found out later, was a mistake. So after 8 long years of going to this gym, the dude was still there every day just sort of staring at me. I was a personal trainer now and left my business cards at the front desk of this gym. So after my husband ended his enlistment, we decided to stay in the state instead of moving back to our hometown. We found a rental house in the next town over, and we were excited to start our civilian life. My husband was told that he'd be starting a night shift as a contractor for IT work, and I wanted to do the schedule with him so things wouldn't be too difficult with sleep. So I ended up converting our living room into an awesome gym and even had commercial equipment. This was so that I could work out at night from home, as well as have some personal training clients come to my house and train them privately. Kind of like a training studio, I guess. I also got tired of giving gyms part of my check while working for them. And during this time, my schedule was that my husband would leave for work at like 11 p.m. and work until 7 a.m. We'd stay awake while I'd train clients at home from 5 a.m. to noon, and then I would go to bed at around 2 p.m. and sleep until around 9 p.m. I was signed up through a company called Find Your Trainer, where clients could find trainers online in their area, and the company would schedule them to meet with you for sessions. They would prepay for this on the company website, and it was kind of like a scheduling service, I guess. Well, my phone chimed with an email one day saying that I had a new client showing up on Wednesday, and that he had purchased 6 sessions. I was excited to be making some money and watching my business grow. The time comes for this guy to show up, and I was nervous but overall excited to have a new client. The doorbell rings, and what do you know? It's the guy. Now, I had to train him because he signed up through Find Your Trainer and not me directly. I was hoping that things would work out, other than being awkward, but couldn't for the life of me understand why he wanted to pay me $63 per session when the dude was clearly in shape and knew what he was doing in the gym. I started to train him nevertheless, and the first session being arms, and felt like I was wasting my time because I knew that he already knew how to work out, and this irritated me a bit because I got into training to help people that actually needed help transforming their health and body. Well, the whole time things were awkward, and he made a comment saying how nice I looked that day, and I just sort of smiled and said thank you. The following session, I was going to train him on back day, and I began to demonstrate a lat pull down to this 6'3" man, being only 5 foot myself, feeling self-conscious and just trying to get this over with. But he then tells me that I'm doing it wrong, and asks if he can show me. Honestly, I was quite offended because, I'm the trainer in this situation, but tried to remain professional. I began to get off the bench so that he could correct me, but before I could get up, he swoops in behind me and reaches around me to grab the handle above me. But on the way to grab the handle, he grabs my chest. I quickly jumped off and told him that that was inappropriate and that the session was now over. That night, I texted him and told him that I feel like I need to terminate his sessions for inappropriate behavior, and he said that he understands. About 3 days later, I'm up at 3 a.m. reading a book in my muumuu, and I hear some noise outside. I was a little bit stunned by this, but my heart was racing, and I was thinking, surely not. I didn't own a gun, I didn't have a dog, just a parrot that likes to cuss everyone out, and 2 cats. So I get up and I peek out the blinds, and I see a man's foot running around the corner, and our shed door flew open. I freaked out and grabbed a butcher's knife and called 911 and told them that someone was trying to break into our home. The cops arrived and searched the property, but they couldn't find the suspect. But multiples of my husband's tools were stolen from the shed. I filed a report and asked them to get in touch with the HOA to review the cameras to see who entered the neighborhood that night. A few days later, the police called me and told me that they spoke with the HOA, and it turns out that their cameras were just decoys. That evening, we went to Walmart, and I saw the client leaving as I was entering, and he just sort of glared at me. I could not help but think it cannot be a coincidence that I fired the guy with no refund, and that surely it was him that stole my husband's tools as revenge. My husband ended up taking me to buy my first gun and a German Shepherd the following week. Now it's 2025, and my husband just got put back on night shift yesterday. We now own our own home in a nicer neighborhood and have a great set of security cameras too, but I am just always on edge, hoping not to run into that guy ever again. This is the first time that I've shared this online, but I have told this story to my friends and family in person. I was already pretty positive that there were things in this world that we just cannot explain with any certainty, science, or calculations. But this story is something that will stay with me for the rest of my life. So I was in rehab, like a pretty modern one that was considered an inpatient hospital. It wasn't actually a hospital or on the grounds of a hospital, but it was staffed 24/7 with doctors, nurses, counselors, and obviously patients. I was one of those patients at the time, and had been in the past as well. Sobriety can be a long road, trust me. No one had ever said that the place was haunted, and I want to make that clear from the get-go. It didn't have a reputation for it or anything. That said, several people, men and women, had died on the premises. 1 or 2 deaths were overdoses from smuggled-in drugs, and another couple, unfortunately, from withdrawal complications. Well, this is what we were told by the counselors anyway. They wanted us to know that it really was life or death, and better to get it right now than to have something like this happen to you in the future. So, there I am going through the journey of recovery, and several minor things happened that kind of made me go, However, one night, I'm totally passed out sleeping, and I'm having a pretty terrible nightmare. The kind that you just sort of want to wake up from because they're so brutally vivid and horrid. I finally managed to wake up out of this dream, and this is what I woke up to. So I open my eyes, and I'm looking at the large window that takes up a whole wall of this room. Imagine a sliding glass door-sized window going across the whole wall. The window overlooks a parking lot from the second story of the building. The streetlights, they illuminate the parking lot too, and the glow from the streetlights creates a sort of very dim backlight. And in front of this dim background is what I can only describe as like a shadowy figure, literally staring into my eye sockets the minute that I opened them, coming out of the dream. This thing that I could see from waist up was perpendicular to the ground. So I'm sort of laying down, and what I mean is that I'm laying down and this thing is standing the same way that I'm laying. I want to try to be clear here because it was standing in front of me as if it was standing on the wall sideways. So when I opened my eyes, it's as if we were having a sort of high noon shootout 12 paces apart. The thing, it's lined up with me sideways and I'm in bed laying down, and for about a whole second, nothing happens. I'm just sort of coming out of my dream trying to grasp what the heck I'm even seeing. But whatever this thing is, it's darker than the dim backlight, like pitch black, and this thing or shadow person then somehow realizes that I'm now looking at it, and darts through the wall so abruptly. Maybe because it was seen and like the gig was up was sort of how I felt about it. But as it's darting through the wall, it hits the blind, this long dangling kind, and this long chain that was for opening and closing the blinds. And I mean, when I tell you I opened my eyes, briefly I had a stare down with this shadow person standing sideways, and it's like the shadow figure goes, oh no, he's awake, darts through the wall, smashing into the blinds and the chain, all in a matter of seconds, and this chain is now swinging wildly. And so, as you can probably imagine, I'm fully freaked out at this point, and I jump out of bed, turn every single available light on, and I look back at the blinds, and they are still swaying from the contact with this, well, shadow figure. I didn't dare go anywhere near that section of the room. I'm like, what the heck was that? And then the next thought that I had was, no one in this whole world is ever going to believe what I just saw. After some time had passed and there was no further explanation or shadow persons, I sort of calmed myself down enough to get a few hours of sleep. Now, here's the kicker. So I woke up in the morning and the chain for the blinds is still swinging. Keep in mind it's like 3 a.m. when this all happened, and it is still swinging from getting nailed by a darting shadow figure here in the morning. So at this point, I need a witness. I hear people waking up, and I run and grab my closest rehab buddy, and I'm like, dude, you won't believe this, but come and look at this. I give him a quick rundown of what had happened, and show him the still swinging window chain. He was absolutely stunned, to say the least, as was I. But he also knew that I wouldn't lie about anything like this for no reason. So he takes a look at the chain, which is still steadily swinging, mind you, and is like, how does this even happen? I was like, yeah, I know, it was like 3 a.m. when it began. So he decides not to touch the chain, and we decide to see what happens. I mean, it won't keep perpetually swinging, right? We go to breakfast, come back up to our rooms at 9 a.m. Him and I immediately go to my room to check on the chain, and it is still swinging, with literally no discernible way of keeping its momentum. We walk up to it, slowly examining it, if there's any fans, vents, or airflow of any kind that could be pushing this chain in its perpetual path like this. And no, there's just no possibility of anything causing it to continue swinging like this. Finally, my buddy sort of cracks, and very hesitantly he grabs this chain, and he stops it. And as any investigator would, he checks it, around it, and all above it, and everywhere that he could, and is like, "That's so strange. Well, let's see if we can get it to do it by ourselves." And I kid you not, this began about 2 hours of us swinging the chain ourselves. And every single time, it wouldn't keep perpetually swinging. It just wouldn't. And I mean, we tried everything to duplicate that swinging, and we just could not get it to swing for more than 30 seconds at max before it came to a stop eventually. My buddy eventually just sort of looks at me and is like, "I believe you 100%. nothing else even makes sense. I mean, you couldn't have made it do it on your own. Me and him kept in touch for a while after we graduated from rehab, always talking about this story. Our only regret was not letting it continuously swing. We often wonder, in fact, if we had just left it, if it would still be swinging today. So, if anyone knows anything about perpetual motion, then you'll know that it is very hard to create. In fact, as far as I know, there needs to be an energy source most of the time. The energy source in this case seemed to be a sideways standing, staring, darting shadow figure. Like I said, other things had happened, but this one was the real cake taker. I will forever believe that there is more to this world than we are told after this. And if you've made it this far, then I appreciate you hearing me out, and thanks for listening. When I was 14, I'm 25 now, the house that my dad lived in, well, it was more of a shed converted into a tiny home, really. But I was convinced that it was haunted. A few different things happened, each one solidified my belief that something was really happening there too. It all started with what I first passed off as sleep paralysis. I would not be able to move anything other than my head, and one night I couldn't open my eyes, and I felt like something the size of a fully grown man sat with his full weight on my chest. Another time I saw something dark and shadowed crouched in the corner of the room, and after about 15 to 20 minutes, I was finally able to move just enough to turn on my lamp, and when I did, nothing was there, and nothing that could have cast a shadow or be mistaken for what I saw. Another time, I heard what sounded like a bird or a bat flying around my room. The flapping noise was really loud and definitely was not coming from outside. I should also mention too that my room locked from the inside and the window was closed at the time too. Now, the reason that I know that this wasn't just a case of sleep paralysis was that it only ever happened in this house. Not at my mum's or grandparents' or friends, only ever at my dad's place. And honestly, at first, I thought that I was losing my mind. But then something happened that made me realize that whatever was happening was actually real. You see, my dad was sitting in the kitchen with the door to outside open, and it was at night, so you could only see as far as the kitchen light went. When all of a sudden I saw something or someone walk past the door. Honestly, it looked like a young teen girl in a white dress and semi-long black or dark brown hair. At first, I genuinely thought that I'd imagined it. But then my dad said, "Did you see that?" Chills, instantly. I asked what he saw, and he described exactly what I had seen. I still get chills even thinking about it, even now while sharing this with you guys. I never did see her again, but I will never forget it. And I mean, she just didn't look fully there, but not completely see-through either, but like she was only 95% there, and it just felt really wrong. I kept seeing and hearing and feeling things when I was in bed until he moved, and then after that, I never experienced anything ever again. A friend of mine has some private land out of the way in northern Georgia, basically lower Appalachia. He's done some work to the land out there, and we would often be out all day just doing some shooting or hunting and whatnot. In 2022, we planned to have a large group of our friends camp out at the land that day. We would shoot during the day, hang out and camp at night, and the two of us would go deer hunting in the morning. We all stayed up late that night. A few retired to their hammocks, or one guy who bought a tent, and the rest of us made a late-night run to the Waffle House. After we got back, we all said goodnight and we eventually went to bed. We were all set up in a sort of big circle around the fire that we had going. That was except for my friend and I, who set up apart from everyone else so we could sneak out in the morning to hunt deer. It must have been around 3 in the morning, and I was in my hammock and unable to sleep. I hadn't even slept a lick at this point and was pretty much wide awake. I didn't do a lot of camping, so I just couldn't get comfortable, I guess, but about 30 minutes after lying down, I suddenly heard a voice that sounded like it was coming from about 50 yards away. It was hard to tell in the dense woods, but it definitely came from the opposite direction of where everybody was at. And it just kept repeating, "Hey, my name," and "Hey, come here," and "Hey." It sounded exactly like one of my friends, though, who I confirmed was asleep in his tent in the opposite direction of the voice. It went on for maybe 10 to 15 seconds and then abruptly stopped. Now, I've always heard the stories of the Appalachians and the woods. I knew not to investigate, obviously. And eventually, about maybe an hour later, I must have fallen asleep. The next morning, I confirmed with my friends that no one was awake at that time. I've been out there many times since then, too. Those woods, I really have never felt the same since that event as well. And I can confirm that there's really no one else around anywhere near those woods. The only thing out there is an abandoned chicken house, really. But after telling this story to a friend that wasn't out there, he told me that he wasn't surprised. He also said that he never felt that those woods were safe. Apparently, him and the guy who owns the woods had a weird event happen while hog hunting late at night one time. I'll save that story for another time, but in any event, this is what happened to me that night, and I still have no idea what it was. I, 20 years old and female, met a guy on Tinder who was 23 and male. His profile said that he was an animal lover, that he was a builder, and that he was a romantic guy. He sounded like a sweet guy. We matched, and after a day of talking, we decided to go out. We went out to this nice pub near my house. Since it was so close too, I walked there. And when I got there, the guy had already sat down and ordered us both some drinks. I sat down and we said a few hellos. Now, I've had some bad experiences with relationships before, so I asked a few waiters if he had put anything in my drink. They all said no, but I was still very cautious. So I drank it with a straw to see if I could taste anything, and thankfully it just tasted fruity. The conversation was a bit awkward, but as it calmed down and after we had eaten some food that we had ordered, he said, "I've seen you on Instagram before." It wasn't the weirdest thing. I do have a public account after all. But the way that he said it was, well, strange. I offered to pay for the meal, but he said that we should split it, and so we did. Afterwards, I had only had one drink, and I decided to go home as it was pretty late and the pub was going to close soon anyway. As I was about a block away from my house, I noticed that I had left my keys at the pub. So I turned around to go and get my keys, but I saw the guy illuminated by a streetlight. I stopped in place. I called out his name and he replied by saying that he had found my keys and called out for me, but I didn't hear anything. Honestly, I was tired out of my mind, so I just got my keys off of him and I watched him walk away, and then I turned around and I walked home. The next week, it was okay, but one day I was in the bath just sort of soaking with an audiobook playing in my headphones, and I got a message from the guy. It was a sweet message asking how I was. I just said that I'm okay and I'm just relaxing. But as I sent that, I heard something fall against a wall in my home. My cats and dogs do sometimes hit the walls, but this sounded larger than normal. Then he sent a message, "I just tripped and fell, LOL." My heart sort of dropped. It might have been a coincidence, but I did get out of the bath, dried off, and I put some clothes on. I looked around my home, but nothing. Well, 8 days later, I received a message from him, just asking how I was. It was late, I was in bed, my light was off. I replied by just saying that I was tired and I was going to sleep, and I sent it, when I heard a notification sound coming from my wardrobe. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the knife from beside the table. It was there if I needed it for defense. I stood up and I ran out of my room, and I heard someone opening my wardrobe, running out of my room. I bolted to my front door, opened it, and ran out. I still had the knife in one hand and my phone in the other. I quickly dialed 911, calling them, and I ran down the street. I looked behind me, and that was when I saw him, just standing there at my home. The police found him some time later, still outside of my home, and arrested him. And apparently the name that he had used on Tinder, and what he had told me, wasn't his real name, and he wasn't 23. The police found out that he was actually 31, and that he had been living in my house's attic for about 2 weeks by this point. My attic actually connects to my wardrobe, and he had apparently crawled in there at some stage. What his real intentions could have been, I'm not too sure, but all I found out was that he had a Polaroid photo of me sleeping, some of me eating, bathing, showering, and basically doing anything. The account, it was taken down by the police, and as the situation develops, I'll be sure to add some more updates. So I just want to say before I begin that I acknowledge that I might be overacting to this entire thing, but also maybe not. Maybe you could be the judge of this and help me out. So, I had worked for a manufacturing company for about 10 years. The job was okay, but my immediate supervisor was an absolute jerk. He was mean for no good reason, and was incredibly harsh. There were people who quit after working with him for just one shift, in fact. He made a woman cry, and just an all-in-all jerk. I was able to let most of his words and behaviors go, but I'd be lying if I said that there wasn't a few times that I did cry on my way home. I was in a long-term relationship with my verbally abusive boyfriend at the time, which meant that I had some pretty extreme confidence issues after dealing with him for so long, for charges that were completely unrelated to the way that he treated me, and that's where things really changed. My supervisor's attitude really changed all of a sudden. Not just towards me, but towards everyone. All of my co-workers made comments about how nice and pleasant the supervisor was being lately. The supervisor's name was Phil. So I made a comment to Phil about an upcoming concert at one stage. I knew from past experiences when trying to make small talk that we both listened to the same type of music. A local radio station that had been giving away tickets, and I had been trying all week to win the tickets, and I was frustrated that I had won, despite trying to call at least 24 times. It was a few days later when Phil asked me what I was doing on the night of the concert, because he told me that he had gotten tickets for the show. I assumed that he meant that he had won them, and I was super excited and told him that I'd love to go if he didn't think that there was anyone else who would want to go with him. He didn't, and so I agreed to go. He gave me his phone number, and I texted him for his address. He asked me to be there about an hour before he wanted to leave, and I thought that was a little bit excessive, but I agreed to meet him at that time. Maybe he wanted to leave early for a good parking place or whatever. When I arrived at his home, I was shocked to find that he had ordered pizza, which I guess isn't that odd, but what was odd was that he had ordered 2 pizzas, and both pizzas were my favorite toppings. Again, not super strange, but a really odd coincidence, I guess, is the better way to put it. especially because my favorite pizza isn't exactly a usual request by most people, but it's not a crazy combination either. It could have just been a very crazy coincidence, so I accepted a few pieces of pizza, and then he opened the fridge and offered me a beverage. The fridge, though, was bare, except for my favorite soda and my favorite beer. Both are pretty popular choices, so again, it might have just been a coincidence, but I accepted the soda and I ate the pizza. He, though, didn't eat any. He just sat on the couch and asked me a million questions about my upbringing, my family, my hobbies. It was odd, especially compared to my ex and how he had treated me, so I just sort of dismissed it. I should probably preface all of this by saying that he was 13 years older than me as well. I was in my 40s and he was in his 50s. He also had very little experience with women, and most people were convinced that he was actually a virgin, and if he wasn't, then he was very inexperienced. His best friend, who also worked at the same company, had told me that he didn't really date much. So as I sat on the couch and ate the pizza and drank this soda, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. I mean, maybe he really didn't have a ton of experience with women, and maybe this was just the way that he was outside of work. He was very attentive and paid attention to the little things after all, and it was so completely opposite to the way that my ex treated me for so long that maybe I just wasn't used to an attentive man. Anyway, after I finished the pizza and I used the bathroom, I was ready to go, and asked him if he wanted me to drive or if he wanted to. I was nervous about driving with another man because this had always been a trigger for my ex, to scream obscenities at me. Phil shook his head though, and opened the front door. There was a limo waiting at the curb. I was kind of shocked, to be honest, and froze for a minute. He saw the look on my face and told me that he always did this for concerts. And that way he could drink on the way there and on the way back, and he didn't have to worry about parking. Well, you didn't have to ask me twice. I agreed and I got straight into the limo. And he was right. It was a really nice drive. The limo was stocked with my favorite beer on ice, and I had a nice relaxing ride to the concert, where he continued to ask me all kinds of questions. I tried to ask him some things too, but he would always deflect or just sort of turn it back around on me. Very playful banter and very different than the Phil that I was used to from work. I didn't know it until we got there, but the tickets to the show were the 6th row, center stage, great seats. All of the bands were awesome. Myself, I am a type of person who will sing and dance at concerts, and this concert was definitely no exception. And more than once I found him staring at me. He didn't sing along or raise a fist in the air or dance or anything. He just watched me to see how I was reacting to everything. And that was probably the first red flag. Well, after the concert and the ride home, he invited me inside eventually. I declined and I went straight home. Things returned to normal at work. He was less of a jerk, and I really saw no sign of the guy that I went to the concert with. A few weeks later, another big-name band announced a tour date nearby, and he told me about it, and I was really excited to go, but I stopped. I mean, yes, we can go, but only as friends. And he said okay to this. I said that I was serious, and I'm paying for my own ticket, and I'm paying for half of the limo at least. And he said that that was okay, that that's fine. I told him again that we're going as friends and nothing more, and he nodded. He invited his best friend and his wife this time. We shared the limo, and we had a great time at the show. In fact, it was the best concert that I'd ever seen, and again, the seats were amazing. I did pay him for the tickets and for the limo as well, and I felt like it was less of an implied date, I guess, and I didn't want him getting the wrong idea. I worried that maybe his reactions during the first concert, that he thought that it was a date or something. And we went to a third concert, and it was a repeat of the second one. I paid my way, and his best friend and his wife joined us, and again it was a great show. We both started going out to local bars. He would text me and I would join him at his house, and we would go to the local bars and watch our favorite local bands. Sometimes we would even play pool or darts. He was always so pleasant and kind and generous, and he would almost get flirty with me as the night went on. He always invited me inside, and I did take him up on a few times, but we would just sort of sit in his basement and play cards and drink or watch TV. He never made a move on me, and he just asked me endless questions about myself. Well, I started to get a little bit concerned when I realized that we were hanging out every weekend. I tried to find excuses about why I couldn't go out, but then he would show up at my house. I usually let him come inside, and we would just sort of hang out and drink together. And one night our favorite band was going to be playing, and he asked me about it earlier in the week. I really enjoyed seeing the band, so I agreed. And afterwards, he walked me to the door and I invited him in. He seemed a little bit more drunk than usual. He made a pass at me, and it was the most awkward pass that I had ever experienced. His kiss was, well, not the best, and it wasn't even remotely nice. In fact, if anything, it was the opposite. I gently pushed him away, and he roughly removed my shirt and kissed me again. And I again pushed him away, this time with a little bit more force. This kiss was exactly like the first one as well, and I told him that I wasn't interested in that. I'm only interested in being friends. That was when he started crying and then sobbing. He told me that he was in love with me, that he had been in love with me for years apparently. I again told him that I wasn't interested. I mean, I hadn't even been single for a year at this stage. I needed time to figure my life out after my ex, and he continued to sob, but professed his love for me and that he would wait for me to figure it all out. He tried to kiss me again, and I had to push him back a little harder than the last time. He finally left after he apologized profusely. Well, I moved a few weeks later, and it was only a few blocks from the other house, but it was smaller and suited my needs better. Also, my ex didn't know where I was, which made me feel much more safe. I'd been living there for a few months, and it was genuinely starting to feel like home. And that was when the text messages started. At first, it was just a random hi. I usually didn't respond, but if I did, I was super vague, and one night I heard someone doing a burnout in front of my house, and I didn't look out the window, but a few minutes later, Phil sent me a text, and all it said was, "Don't you hate it when someone drives by with a noisy car?" I didn't respond. I knew that it was him, and I started to hang out at my parents' house a little more often. I would still hear a car come by and squawk their tires. I mean, maybe it was a coincidence, but I really don't think so. I found a Christmas present underneath my windshield wipers one day while I was parked at my parents' house, and I had no doubt that it was from Phil. That was when I stopped answering his text messages entirely. A few months later, I had left my house at the usual time, and I started driving to work. I had been transferred to another department in the company, so I worked in a completely different building than Phil. I was definitely enjoying the break from the constant staring, and as I drove my usual route, I couldn't help but notice the familiar car that made every turn that I did. I changed lanes, and so did they. I took a left, and so did they. His car was a pretty rare make and model, and even the color was unique, and I knew instantly that it was him. I debated calling the cops, but in the end I chose not to. I pulled into the parking lot at work, and he pulled right up behind me, so I really had nowhere to go now. I gathered my things and got out of the car and locked it. He was already waiting for me. He asked me why I was avoiding him, and I told him that I wasn't. He said, "It sure seems like you're avoiding me," and I said no. He asked, well, how have things been? I was so freaked out by the whole thing that I turned towards the door and said that I needed to get inside now. He glared at me and then said, no, you don't. I ignored him and I went inside. He squawked his tires again and left the parking lot. It took me quite a while to gather myself and to go onto the production floor after that interaction. I spoke to one of my co-workers who was familiar with everything that had happened, and after discussing it, I sent a text message to Phil and told him that he was stalking me and that I didn't appreciate it and that it was not wanted. I thought that we could be friends, but I guess that that's too much for you. Please stop following me to work, driving by my house or my parents' home, and no more text messages. In fact, any more contact on your part and I'll be contacting the police. His response was instant, like he'd been waiting for it almost. He told me, I will drive wherever I feel like. I'm not going to change my habits or my life because you're paranoid. I'm not stalking you. You have no idea. I have not had any other contact with him since then. It's been almost 10 years and I'm married now, in fact, and living on the other end of town. And maybe I'm paranoid, but sometimes I see the same car drive by slowly or late at night, and I hear someone doing a burnout in front of my home. I'm not sure if it's him, but if it is, well, it's been 10 years and that thought is rather disturbing. Ladies, be careful of the men you choose to be friends with, because this, for me, could have ended a lot differently. We moved into our house about a year ago. It was built in 1970 and had only had 2 previous owners. I don't know any other history about the house than that, but right away I had some weird vibes in different areas of this home. I smudged the place a couple of times right after moving in, as I always do after moving, and things felt okay after that. In fact, nothing weird has been happening until the last couple of weeks. For some extra background too, we had just welcomed boy-girl twins into this world 2 months ago, and we have a 22-month-old toddler as well. My toddler is a really great sleeper. We never have any issues with his sleep. In fact, he's the kind of kid that wants to go to bed on his own when he's tired. Well, about 2 weeks ago, he started waking up at night, freaking out big time, where he's so scared to the point that he's shaking. I can get him to go back to bed after a while, but a lot of nights now I've been having to bring him to bed with us. He never used to go through this kind of thing, but now he talks about a meanie in his room. He also says that he sees an owl. He'll point to the corner of his room by the ceiling, even during the daytime. He even tracks whatever he's seeing with his eyes across the wall, and when I go into his room to comfort him at night, oftentimes he says things like, "Bite mama" or "hurt mama." Super creepy, right? Well, my husband and I have had some stuff happen recently. My husband has heard footsteps down the hallway at night and swears that he heard his mum calling his name. One evening, my son's kid-sized rocking chair was flipped totally upside down in his room. And I can confirm that it was upright just a couple of minutes prior when I was in there. Nobody else was in that room when it happened, and so I saged the whole house again a few days ago and paid extra attention to my son's room. But this time, things haven't gotten better though. My sister, who is a medium, she told me that she thinks that it's possible that from the new babies, our extra stress and some recent renovations to the place that we might have stirred things up around here. She lives in a different country, so we cannot really have her come here to check things out for us. I'm going to try and smudge the house again today, but I am really getting worn out with what's going on here. We're already exhausted with our newborns, but having to deal with this on top of things is genuinely very tiring. So, that's why I'm here. I'm looking for any advice and am also interested in similar stories that others may have and how they dealt with this. Because right now, I'm exhausted and I just want this gone. This happened about 4 years ago. So my aunt had just moved into a new apartment in a residential complex. It was summer and I had just started high school and I went to stay with her for a while. The apartment, it had 2 bedrooms. My aunt had one and I shared the other with my older cousin, who was about 9 years older than me. Since the room was small, we shared a bed. Because the electrical outlets were weirdly placed as well, one at the head and one at the foot, we ended up sleeping in opposite directions. She slept with her head at the top of the bed, and I slept with my head at the foot. Right above her head was a large window, though, facing another apartment building in the same complex. From where I lay, I had a perfect view straight into the apartment directly across from us as well. Now, my cousin always went to bed pretty early, but I was a bit of a night owl at the time. I usually stayed up until around 5 a.m., and that's when I noticed something weird. Every single night, without fail, at exactly 4:02 a.m., the light in that apartment would turn on. Just one light in one specific room, and at exactly 4:05 a.m., it would turn off. Never early, never late, 3 minutes, every single night. At first, I brushed it off, but it happened so consistently that I got curious. One night, I asked my cousin to stay up and watch it with me, and sure enough, 4:02, lights turn on, 4:05, and they're off again. She was so creeped out by this that she told my aunt the next morning. We were all a little bit unsettled, but mostly curious, I guess. A few days later, and we decided to visit the apartment and ask. A woman in her 40s opened the door, and she looked kind and humble, but a little bit tired. She told us that she was the daytime carer for the woman who lived there, an 80-something-year-old woman who had been completely paralyzed after a stroke. The old woman, she could only ever move her eyes and her mouth, and she had no husband, no children, no family, just a small pension that barely covered this caregiver, who could only work from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. because the old lady didn't have enough money to hire her to stay overnight. Which means that from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., the old woman was completely alone. But then the caregiver said something that made us all go silent. But the old woman apparently had a severe eye condition. She was extremely sensitive to light and had begged the caregiver to never turn on any lights in the home, especially not at night. But we had seen that living room light turn on at 4:02 a.m. every single night. And according to the caregiver, the old woman never even left her bedroom. After that, we just kind of panicked, I guess. We just thanked her and we left. And to this day, I still cannot explain it. The precision, the timing, and the fact that it stopped happening immediately after the old woman passed away. We still talk about it from time to time, and none of us can make any sense of it. Was it a glitch, a ghost, something else entirely? If anyone has ever heard of anything like this, then please do let me know, because it's perplexed me for many years. We bought this house 1 year ago, July 8th. We were told when we came to see the house that the previous owner had actually died, but it wasn't until we were a week or two away from closing that I found the obituary and read that she had died at her home. Immediately too, when we moved in, I started seeing things. My 18-year-old daughter said that it was haunted from the moment that she stepped in. She was not with us when we looked at it. This was after we had bought it. It started with me, though, seeing what I would say as a woman walking from the dining room to the living room, as I went from the living room to the kitchen. It makes a big circle, and the houses are sort of tri-level, so the main floor, then the stairs that go to the upstairs to the bathroom and the bedrooms, and separate stairs that go downstairs to the walkout basement that is always open, except for the utility room and the second bathroom. Also, from moving in, every time that I'd go down the stairs from the bedroom, I would see someone standing on the other stairs. It's hard to describe this, but there's a window with no glass that lets you sort of see the other stairs that go down. A friend had experienced this too, and I have not had it happen in months, and really nothing has changed. And well, I just sort of kept all of this to myself, to be honest. But my husband, who has been a non-believer until recent years, had experiences that have changed that. He started seeing things. For instance, he had a black shadow walk up to him in the bathroom. He genuinely thought that someone had come in until he saw it disappear. It really freaked him out too. He has seen shadows other times too. I've also seen shadows walk by and move doors even. But the weirdest thing would be seeing what looked like a person reflected in the TV when it was black. It was like someone was bent over looking at the TV very close, and then they stood up and they stepped back. Obviously, I see my husband, and I can assure you that it wasn't him. I woke up and got out of bed, and he was asleep next to me, so I was trying to not wake him, and I started downstairs and realized that he was asleep on the couch, though. I went and checked, and that's when I noticed that the bed was empty. That one really freaked me out, but the newest thing was actually last night. I had just turned my phone off and I was settling in to go and get some sleep, and I always wear a sleep mask, so it was on that night like normal. When I felt an arm on my hip and it sort of slid across me. I instantly took my mask off, rolled over and checked my husband, who was asleep with both arms under his blanket. We have separate ones, and I hadn't felt him move. This is the first time that whatever this is has touched me, and it was very weird. And before someone asks, yes, I do have cats and my door stays shut and they're not allowed in my room at all. Also, while this is not everything that has happened, it's certainly a big chunk, and these are the more scary or meaningful ones, I guess. I should tell some of the other stories sometime, but for now I'm just trying to get some help and some advice as to what I should do about this. So me, 29 and male, my girlfriend, female and 27, my friend or roommate, male and 28, and my girlfriend's sister, female and 26, moved into some new apartments about a year ago. We haven't had anything weird happen at all, besides the occasional sound every now and then that nobody thinks much about. But in the last 6 months or so, the balcony door will just open. We live on the 3rd floor, no fire escape. It would happen often enough to where we had to be sticklers about locking the balcony door. The rule is that if you unlock the balcony door, you have to lock it back up or it will come open and the cats will get out. Well, we stopped having a problem with the door opening altogether at some point. And about 2 hours before sharing this, I heard someone yanking the heck out of the balcony door. I'm the first one to wake up at like 4 a.m. to get ready for work. Today I happened to be sitting in the living room 10 feet away from this door while sipping on some coffee, and I heard the door handle squeak and the door yank really hard enough in fact for the blinds on the door to stir from the force and stay moving for a good minute. I stared at the door trying to figure out what had just happened. I looked at the lock and saw that it was still deadbolted. Both cats came over to investigate. One of them had their tail puffed up. I just couldn't figure it out, and I'd had enough, so I ran to my bedroom and sat there sipping my coffee. The 2 cats followed closely behind. I was sitting on the bed trying to explain away what had just happened when I could hear the door yank again with a slightly lesser force. I continued to sit in the room out of fear, and I began looking up stories of negative air pressure opening doors and how that works in an effort to find an explanation. But nothing accounts for the door handles squeaking from turning at the same time. I then heard the door yank again, and this time my frustration overcame my fear. I bolted out of my room. I found my friend or roommate, male and 28, standing in the living room. He looked startled from me popping up like I did, but immediately said the balcony door was open. It was freezing in the living room now from the chilly night and the door being just wide open. He understandably must have been a little frustrated too, but I mentioned that the door was locked and told him about what had just happened. I'm not entirely sure if he believes me or not, but he didn't object because the door opening has been a problem for a while. I am a skeptic, always have been. I'm always able to explain things away, but this one, I'm just stumped by. I guess I'm here just looking for explanations as to what this could be, and that if it involves the paranormal, what should I do about it? What I just witnessed is the weirdest thing I've seen outside of movies, so please, debunk it if you think you can. I'll try to respond to any questions below in the comments. I'm going to work now and I'll be there all day for the most part, so I'll get to them when I can. Also, just quickly, I spoke with my roommates. It was confirmed that the door was fully latched and locked that night. I did a full inspection of the door, the hinges, the strike plate, and even the latch mechanisms. The hinges are very tight, not even a little bit of play in them. The deadbolt is working very well and to the fullest degree. The door handle is pretty wobbly, but the rest of the mechanism is fine, which is strange because it didn't used to be like that, and we almost never used that door. I looked for looseness in the strike plate and any unusual bends or anything, but there aren't any. Every bit of the door just works great. I tried yanking on the door myself. There's no way that there can be any movement, let alone enough to cause the blinds to move to the degree that they did. I positioned the handle mechanism to sit just loose enough on the strike plate to not latch but not fully open either. This was very difficult to do, but I then yanked the door a few times, and it takes a great amount of force with both hands to pull the door open from this position. If wind or negative air pressure was the issue, it would have taken a heck of a lot, which I'm not saying is impossible, but there would be obvious evidence of this for sure. But even if this was the case, the deadbolt was fully latched, like I said. It is also confirmed that there were no windows open that night anyway. I remember it being a very still morning in terms of wind, in fact, and I asked my co-workers along with my roommates if it had been windy at any point in case I missed it, but everyone said that it was not windy in the slightest at all, not even a breeze. I feel really weird coming to the conclusion that an ethereal being of some kind opened my door forcefully, but it's looking more and more like I will have to accept this as my answer. I'm still open to any other ideas to investigate or reasons to explore what could have caused this, but I'm running out of answers, and that is pretty frightening. I'm a property manager and a 1-year postpartum, so I return to my company part-time. This is fun because I get to sort of float around to different apartment communities who need help and just help where needed. In September, I helped at a property about an hour from my house. It's a bit of a drive, but fairly small property, with relatively no big problems, so easy money for the day. I'm covering for a manager out on vacation, and of course it's the dreaded 6th of the month. This means that I'm handing out late letters and making calls, unfortunately. Definitely not my favorite part of the job, but it is necessary. The one thing that I hate about floating, though, is the residents don't know me well. So I'm delivering late letters and calling, and they don't even know me. Again, not my favorite part of the job, but it has to be done. So, I had about 10 late letters to deliver that day. All was going normal and fine. Some people answer the door and say, "Yep, sorry, I'll have it paid on such and such date." Another person didn't answer, so I left info on the door, but they flipped me off as I was walking away. All pretty normal stuff, to be honest, that just comes with the job. but I get down to about the 7th or 8th person. I walk up to this apartment and I can tell from the outside the occupants have absolutely destroyed this home. I smelled cigarettes, cat urine, and just a general mustiness before I even knocked. All the blinds were broken, blankets up on the window, all the works. I get up to the door, do my normal quick knock, waited about 5 seconds and was ready to post notice to the door. Right as I was folding it up to put it between the door partly swings open. A gentleman, wearing just boxers and a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, opens the door but doesn't unlatch the security lock, so the door's not opened all the way. "What do you want?" he says as he's giving me a death glare, but also looking me up and down inappropriately at the same time. I explain that I was just here to deliver the late letters and that I would be on my way now. As I'm explaining this, I notice that he keeps looking over his shoulder, as if someone is standing next to him behind the door. I find this a bit odd, as if someone is hiding from me, especially because this gentleman won't open the door all the way. I hear some whispering, and now I'm sure that he's communicating with someone. The gentleman in the doorway asks me to wait and says that he has things in his apartment that he needs looked at. I explain that I was just here for the letter, but that he can send some photos into the office, and that I would get work orders in. He begins complaining about our maintenance team and states that he really wants someone to take a look in person. At this point, I'm feeling really uneasy. Typically speaking, I would enter and help no problem usually, but between the looks this guy was giving me and the creepy who knows who is behind the door, I'm just not feeling safe at this point. I defer again, trying to make myself sound unimportant and just say, "I'm just a floating person. I can't do anything without manager approval until she gets back, so really there's no point." At this point, someone catches my eye upstairs though. I see a window blind move. I notice 2 additional guys upstairs who are both staring down at me. I'm so uneasy now too that I could be sick. I tell the gentleman that I won't be entering without maintenance or the property manager present, due to it being an ongoing maintenance concern and there not being much that I can personally do anyway. He looks annoyed and finally just slams the door in my face. I get back to the office and grab the maintenance supervisor for the property to chat things over regarding this encounter. The maintenance supervisor explained to me that there used to be an old man who lived in that apartment, but then his son took over the lease after he died. He told me that he's noticed a lot of strange activity and individuals around that home since the dad died, but he hasn't personally witnessed anything illegal yet, so he's just let it go for now. He explained that they plan to make the move when the contract is over due to the condition of the home alone anyways, but while I cannot prove something horrible was going to happen, if I entered the premises that is, this is by far the creepiest encounter that I've had in property management in all my 7 years. This is an old story about my first paranormal experience that happened at least 17 years ago. This happened back when I was around 5 years old. I lived in a trailer with my parents on a hill in an isolated area in the middle of the woods, with the only family and friends of the family living within the mountainous area around us. One Saturday, I asked my parents if my cousin Sarah, 6 and female, could stay the night since she only lived a few minutes away. My parents agreed and picked Sarah up at around 8 p.m. Me and Sarah ended up staying pretty late talking while my parents fell asleep in the living room. My bedroom is in the middle of the trailer with 2 open doorways to the hallway, and since I had no doors, we could always see the light from the living room to mine. Well, as me and Sarah were talking, suddenly Sarah just stopped talking and turned her head towards the end of my bed. My bed was one of those bunk beds that had like storage cabinets on the bottom instead of another bed, so we were a bit elevated from the ground. But I noticed her face had a look of horror, so I asked her what was wrong, and she told me that there's something standing at the end of the bed. I turned to quickly look, and I saw a white-looking figure standing still at the end of the bed. I was quick to believe that it was probably just the clothes basket, and that stuff like that can look scary in the dark, and so that's what I told her. I thought that I knew that too because I've mistaken objects in the dark for other things before. I was just trying to rationalize the situation, I guess, so that Sarah wouldn't be afraid to come over again. And so I told her that I'll prove it to her, that it's just the basket at the end of the bed. Sarah begged me, though, to not do this, but I already started crawling to the end of my bed. I stared at what looked like a tall, white, blobbish figure, and looked back at Sarah and stuck my hand right through the figure. My heart instantly dropped when I swatted my hand around and felt nothing. No basket, no object at all. But strangely, it felt like I stuck my hand in the freezer. I quickly turned to look back at the figure with my hand still in it and saw it form what looked like a face. I scrambled back to Sarah as fast as I could in absolute horror. Me and Sarah were freaking out at the other end of the bed, staring at this thing. Seeing it in that moment, it almost looked like a white silhouette of a man with long hair. He just stood there, not moving in the slightest, though. Eventually, we came to the conclusion, though, that our only options were that if one of us can either turn the lights on or run to the living room to get my parents, that the figure might eventually go away. Me and Sarah argued who would be the one to do it, and eventually I caved in and just went for the light switch. I took one last glance at the figure before flipping the switch, and once the lights came on, it was gone. And so I flipped it back off just to be sure. And yep, it had disappeared for good, it seemed. Me and my cousin ended up staying up until morning that night, too scared to sleep. I've told my family about this and found out that our yard and most of the mountain area was actually native burial grounds. In fact, locals around the area nickname it Witches' Mountain since there has also been reports of witches living in the area back in the day. My family is very religious and don't like speaking much about the history, so I'm really sorry I cannot provide more information regarding that, as I was never really allowed to look into it. 17 years later, though, both me and Sarah, we still remember this experience like it was just yesterday. My wife and I have been living in our apartment for about 6 months now, and strange things started occurring about maybe a month ago. My dog is always staring at things around the house, growling at something that doesn't seem to be there. A few weeks ago, my wife was lying in bed and felt a motherly touch push her hair back, like a real human touch. She was completely alone in the room, mind you, with all windows and doors shut. There was no wind or anything either. Then recently, it happened again and she came out of the room feeling creeped out. But the most frightening thing just happened recently. In the middle of the night, while we were sleeping, our dog barked like crazy at the dark hallway and ran into it. We sprinted after him, checked the whole house, and we found nothing. We played it off as a bad dream of his, but then we all went back to sleep and I had a terrible nightmare. I woke up in a sleep paralysis episode with my dog staring at me. His mouth was moving and a man's voice was screaming at me to get out, over and over, getting faster and louder. My wife then had to wake me up as I was whimpering and couldn't move. I'm not a big believer in the paranormal, but this has become very terrifying for us. My wife and I are just looking for explanations at this point. She thinks that someone nearby in our apartment complex might be doing rituals or something. We found this white goo a couple of feet outside of our door that won't go away recently, like candle wax or something. Any help or explanation would be appreciated because we just want life to go back to normal. This happened around 2010 to 2012. My house was extremely old. Multiple people died in that home too. There were nice people that my neighbors knew of in there, and they had apparently died in there, like a World War II vet who was really nice to my friends before I lived on that street. He left some things behind, like a bayonet attachment to his rifle, and I still have that to this day. My friend who saw the man alive around 2004 slept over my house around 2009 and said that he saw the ghost of that old man walking towards his battle blade in my room and faded away as he got it. But as more and more friends slept over, I had a lot of friends at that time, they all said the same thing. Something felt off about my house. It was just creepy and they sensed something at night. My dog, she would violently growl or bark at, well, nothing, and specifically growl or bark at my sister's room when it was empty. My sister and I one night heard what sounded like footsteps upstairs in her room, moving furniture in her room. We heard forks and spoons being tossed around in the kitchen. Keep in mind, this was before iPhones. My sister was in a separate room than me, and we came together the next morning to realize that we had both heard the same things going on in separate rooms, which we found insane. But then there was the experience. So one night, I was getting ready to go to sleep. I didn't have a door in my bedroom for many years, which I know sounds weird, but that's just how it went in my house. My dad at the time, he was severely depressed, drinking a lot and neglecting the house and basically the family too, which I believe ties to the negative energy in that house. But I was laying down closing my eyes as I wanted to fall asleep. The house was dead silent, and no joke, I felt a hard slap across my face, left cheek, so I automatically assumed it was my younger siblings playing a joke on me. I looked around my bed, my room, called their names, and I got nothing. The house was pitch black, and I went to lay back down and close my eyes, laying on my back this time. Didn't really think too much of it, and I wasn't scared really at all. But then 2 or so minutes go by, and another slap across the face, but this time the opposite side of my face, the right side. At this point, I feel annoyed, but also alarmed for sure. Something was off. I repeated the same search, and nobody was in my room or hiding on the stairs. My sister's room was across the hall upstairs. Her door was 4 feet away from my door, and if I laid on my side, I could see directly into her room if her door was open. At this point, I was really uncomfortable and sort of freaked out. I laid on my side with my eyes closed, and that was when I suddenly felt, well, what I can only describe as a presence, an energy that I had never felt before. Something told me to open my eyes, so I did, and I regret that to this day. What I saw was a tall black figure, out of this world and definitely not human. I could tell that it was not of our world because it seemed to be, well, not totally in our realm, if that makes sense, like it was phasing a bit. I couldn't tell if it was 3 feet away from me or 13 feet away, but I saw my sister's room open, and I could basically see as if it was hunched over my sister's bed in her room. It was absolutely terrifying, so I just sort of sat there, paralyzed, frozen, not knowing what to do. Eventually, though, I fell asleep staring at it. I woke up terrified, and I went to school feeling off that day. I walked home that day, and I waited 2 hours outside of my house until somebody else got home. I saw that figure a final second time one night. I was playing Xbox 360, the good old days, right, with my best friend, and we were talking online late at night, when suddenly his voice went out, and I just didn't hear anything from him. That's when I felt that tense feeling again, like I was being watched. This time I didn't have a door yet, but I had a sort of thin white blanket nailed to the door frame to act as some type of privacy door or blanket. But when I decided to look at my door, I saw it again. This black figure staring at me, only peeping its head in between the blanket and the door frame. At this point, it is physically touching real-life objects and altering them by having me see the blanket wrapping around its peeking head. It stared at me, and I decided to scream loud for my sister this time. I screamed her name, Jen, 3 times, until I heard her footsteps come stumbling to my room, and as she flung the makeshift blanket door in the air to enter, the entity just disappeared with the movement of the blanket. She seemed really confused and asked if I was okay. I told her what I thought I saw, and, well, I never saw that thing again after that. Other weird things about that house too is that my dog saw things that we couldn't see. My father was depressed and drinking, losing his mind. My mother tried to delete herself, but she survived, thank God. My brother became depressed, and he also had thoughts of the same thing in that house. My sister became addicted to drugs in that house, which didn't last long and went away quickly, thankfully. And then this happened to me. I truly believe that this house, it was cursed, because things have been so much better since we moved from there, and I'm really thankful for that. When I was 5 or 6 years old, 20 years back now, my mum and I moved into this small home in the country. No property size, but still no neighbors or anything. Like 5 minutes from a Walmart too. The first experience happened in my bedroom. My bed was against the farthest left wall corner next to a window, and the door was to the farthest right corner. My room was always clean as we simply didn't have enough stuff to make it cluttered. I remember waking up though and just sort of knowing something was there, in the corner near the door. How? Because I remember thinking to myself, just close your eyes and everything will be okay. But I couldn't. I turned and had seen this lump, a figure made from my clothing, as in it was taller than me or anything that I could have piled there. So in a shot in the dark, I beelined to my mum, who was in the room adjacent to me, and said that there was someone there. When she came and turned on the light, she told me to come inside. Clothes were absolutely everywhere, all over the floor, and just a chaotic mess flung around all over the room. She asked me if I did this, and I said no. Needless to say, I didn't sleep in my room that night. Now, the second is what actually traumatized me, as in the specific action prior to the encounter made me panic for 6 years afterward. Flushing the toilet, I would have this deep anxious feeling no matter where and would run out of the washroom afterward. The washroom had only one entry and the window was too small for a person to fit through. The toilet was right next to the door as well. But I did my business and flushed, and when I turned, there stood an old man. He was bearded, clean, and he just stood there looking at me. When I finally found my voice, I absolutely screamed. My mum and I described it like a blood-curdling scream, as if I had just cut off my finger or something. She came in to me, closing my eyes, hands covered them, and saying that there was a man in there with me. It took her some time to console me to open and talk further, but when I did, we didn't stay much longer in that house. It's probably important to state too that my mum was the one who verified my stories as an adult. Since then, I've spent years trying to either connect with whatever sense that I had, to see that person, or dismiss what I had seen as something else, but I just can't. Between the long-term fear, anxiety, trauma from the event, to my mum's own account of the event secondhand, I can't find an actual explanation for whatever occurred that day. Throughout my childhood, I grew up in a pretty dark household, and I could recall several instances where, well, really no explanation could be derived. Here's a few. So the first one, we were watching a movie when a picture frame that had hung on the wall suddenly lifted and crashed to the floor. It had been there for years with no issues prior to this, so it was really strange. On another occasion, my older sister, 18 at the time, she was home from college, about to head to work. She talks to my mother from another room and tells her, "I love you, Mum, I'm going to work, bye." My mother replies, "I love you too, bye." And my sister begins driving down the street when she sees our mother driving past. My sister instantly hits the brakes. My mother recalls seeing a shocked expression and my sister's face ran pale. My sister says, "Weren't you at the house?" My mum was coming home from the store apparently though, and hadn't been home for at least 45 minutes. A third occasion, my little sister, 10, and I, 12, were home alone, too afraid to leave the family room due to having a weird creeped out feeling. My father comes home from shopping and asks us why we moved the cat tower from his room to the hallway, blocking the door that he was trying to get into. But I can assure you that we never left that room. No one in our family touched it at all, and I still have no idea how it got there. Another time, my father, sister, and I are in my parents' room working on homework and work and all that, when we hear the front door handle being messed with and hear the door open. My mother and sister were on their way home from my sister's dance class, so we yelled hello. Our dogs run to the door to greet them. We hear sort of frantic, loud footsteps all throughout the home suddenly, and even outside around the house. They never responded to us. We hear the footsteps approaching the door and stops at the bedroom door. Getting worried, my dad yells for my mother, and realizing that something was wrong, my father grabs a Glock from his safe. He then searches all throughout the house. When he leaves the room, the footsteps stop. My sister and mother text our group chat, and they tell us that they were on their way home now. In other words, there was no one else in the home. No door opening and closing, signifying a person exiting or anything, but something definitely entered. Finally, on another occasion, seeing my sister walk past me in the kitchen as I prepared my lunch for the next day, I ask her if she wants me to make her some as well. She doesn't respond as she enters the family room, and so confused, I walk after her. But she wasn't in the family room. I then enter her bedroom down the hall. I ask her why she ignored me just then, and she tells me that she hasn't left her room for over 20 minutes as she's doing homework. I instantly felt the blood draining from my face when she said that. Our home did have a dark history. I found a calendar shoved in the floorboards once from the 1930s, which mysteriously disappeared. Our home was apparently a meth lab in the early 2000s. The couple who lived there died in a police chase. Even our grandmother said that we would claim that there was a man watching us in our home bedroom, which she said creeped her out due to the fact that a man had died in her bedroom before they moved in. Unfortunately, she ended up passing away in that very spot too. I never really believed in ghosts, supernatural, or what have you. There were several things that happened where I questioned it, I suppose, but I would just explain it away in my head, even if the explanation isn't even that good. For instance, me and my wife were in bed and we felt a thump on the bed. I turn on the light and there's nothing in the room. At that time we had 2 cats and they were really fat. The thump was very similar to when he tries to jump on the bed, but I checked and they were in the other room and our bedroom door was closed. I chalked that up to someone hitting the floor really hard one way or another, and we lived in an apartment at that time and the impact was felt on the bed. So I accepted that and just carried on, even though the question definitely stayed at the back of my mind. But all in all, I've never really seen anything physically, so I just wasn't a believer. That is, until around a few months ago, when me and my wife were watching TV. It was the middle of the afternoon and we heard a thump on our sliding door to the backyard. It sounded a lot like a snowball hitting it. There was snow on the ground at this time, so I go to investigate, thinking that maybe it was my daughter in the backyard throwing snowballs at the door or something. It sounded like something soft hitting it, which is why I thought it was a snowball. I walk up to the glass door and I see nothing out there, until something small and metallic hits the glass right in front of my face. I watch it bounce off the glass and land right by my foot and on the rug that I'm standing on. I pick it up and it's a little screw for a Ring doorbell camera. I replaced our old one the day before and that was one of the extra screws that came with it, and I had put the screw in the box that it came in and put the box in the drawer, which is the direction the screw was thrown from. My wife heard it hit the glass as well and asked, "What was that?" as she was watching me investigate the first sound. when I told her, we were both freaked out. I mean, there was no way anyone threw that. There was nothing but a dead-end kitchen where it came from, and we were the only ones home on top of that. This was the first time that I'd actually seen something, and I couldn't explain it away. Even a bad explanation just wouldn't fit. Anyway, days later and I'm waking up for work. It's dark in my bedroom. I'm the only one in there. I have light switches by my head on the wall, but I decided to get up and walk to the end of the room to turn on another light switch that lights up my whole room and not just the headboard. As I'm walking, I remember the incident with the screw being thrown, and I say to myself, what if whatever that was that threw the screw made its presence known right now and scares the heck out of me? And instantly, after that thought was made, I heard a very loud crashing sound coming from the hallway area outside of my door. I get startled and flip on the lights and open the door. My wife was downstairs and comes to the bottom of the stairs asking what was that. I said, I don't know, and go to the laundry room, and I see a picture has fallen off the wall and onto a garbage can, knocking the garbage can over, which is what was the sound. Now, either that was a very crazy coincidence, or perhaps whatever it is actually answered me. I told my wife, and she got mad at me, saying that now she's stuck at home with the kids after I summon the spirit and leave for work. Fast forward a few months, and I come home from work and I'm the only one home. It's still daylight outside, and I take the garbage out. As I'm walking back to the front door, I feel a little rock hit me in the back of my arm. I turn around and see nothing. I look up and around and see absolutely nothing or no one around. But the craziest thing is that this was caught on my Ring doorbell camera. I've watched it many times, and I can assure you that there was no one anywhere. I could not see the rock on the camera, obviously, because it was too small, but it had to have been thrown from directly behind me, judging from where it had hit me. It was not thrown hard either, but just hard enough that I could feel it. I never could find the rock, but I imagine that it was pretty small because I never picked it up on the camera. Although, I should probably entertain the possibility that it wasn't a rock at all. So before I get started, I just want to let you guys know that I'm going to briefly describe different scenarios that have happened between my sister and me. I also do want your honest opinion on what you think this thing is or these things are, and if you could let me know, I would be very grateful. So, I'm just going to start with something terrifying that has happened to me first. It was around nighttime, and I was rinsing something out in my laundry room sink. To the right of me was the back door of our house, and then there was the entrance to the kitchen. My mum had asked me to help her clean around the house that day, so I did. She is my mum after all, and I can't really say no. But I was about to start vacuuming when my mum told me that the vacuum needed to be cleaned out. So as I was emptying it, I noticed a sponge that was part of the vacuum that was very dirty, so I walked over to the laundry room sink to get it nice and clean. I started washing the sponge and drenching it in soap, just minding my own business. As I began washing that nasty sponge, I saw my mum walk past the kitchen doorway. She caught my eye from my peripheral vision, and I wanted to call her over so that she could see how much dirt was coming out of the sponge. And as I shout "Mama," I wait a second expecting her to answer me, but instead, I noticed her walk right past and not even turn her head. I look in her direction, and what I saw, though, was definitely not my mum. The figure that I saw was completely black. The weird thing, though, is that it was built just like my mother, though. She was pregnant at the time, so I noticed that the figure had a belly, and my mum always had her hair in a ponytail just like the figure. The figure had perfect posture, and as it walked past, it wasn't bobbing up and down like it should have been. It looked more like it floated past. I know, very strange description, but that's the best way that I can describe it. After I realized what happened though, I shouted louder for my mum and she wasn't responding. I left the laundry room to find out that she was sitting outside on the front porch the whole time. She was never even in the house when this happened. I knew then though that whatever that was, it was trying to mimic my mum for some reason. Does anybody know if this could have been some type of demon though? Because honestly, I have no idea. Now I'm going to tell you a story about my sister, Ariana. So one day, she was sitting in her room watching something on her iPad. She had her knees up so that she could place her iPad on her lap as she was watching it. As she was minding her own business, she noticed a figure standing right by the entrance of her room. She described it as being very, very tall, extremely thin, with pale white skin. Its cheeks were sunken in and it had bright white eyes. The lips, they also looked extremely red and were abnormally wide, smiling at her. It was very still as it watched her and she immediately looked up at it. She put her knees down. She got extremely scared, obviously, and closed her eyes trying to convince herself that there was nothing there, that she was just seeing things. But as she opened them back up, that thing that was there, it hadn't left. She threw her iPad on her bed and bolted to her bedroom door, but as she was passing that thing, she said that it moved beside her in a way that, whenever she passed it, it made her bump into its body. She was struggling to get her door unlocked as she noticed its head was fully turned towards her, its body still facing the bed. She immediately ran to my room, swung the door open and just stood there looking at me. I knew that something was off instantly because she just had this look on her face. She looked like she had just watched somebody get murdered and her face was completely pale, her eyes were bloodshot. I immediately asked Ariana, "What happened? Are you okay?" And as those words left my mouth, she just started sobbing, struggling to get any words out. She literally started hyperventilating, in fact, in fear of what she had just seen. I came up to her, calming her down, sat her down on the bed, and she told me what had just happened. Chills instantly ran down my spine too. I had goosebumps everywhere. Genuinely too, I was terrified for her. This made me angry in a way too, because whatever it was trying to scare her. But my question is, for what? Does this thing seriously not have anything better to do? At this time, my sister was 12 years old, and she continued seeing disgusting things all around the house too. It's a bit like these things that she sees are trying to get something out of her, maybe. Maybe her being scared gives them power over her or something. I genuinely don't know what it could be, but I pray to God every night about letting my sister and I have full authority and power over these entities that we see. Also, only me and my sister have seen things in our house, nobody else. There was even a time when I had a friend over and she saw something at the same time that I did, but I saw the full-on figure as she only saw the shadow. Honestly too, I would think that I was going crazy if it wasn't for the fact that others had seen something too. I've heard things about mediums and how they can feel or see and sort of sense spirits or demons or whatever, and I was wondering if I may have something similar to that. Like, sometimes I'll be sitting in my room and I feel the presence around me change, or when I walk into a room I can tell something is off. I've seen things in other people's houses as well, and I have so many more stories that I could share too, and if anybody wants to hear them, then please do let me know, as it would maybe be therapeutic to share them now. But the fact that my mum, dad, and my older sister have never seen or experienced something in my home, except for Ariana and I, is weird, right? Please let me know what you guys think about everything, and thanks for listening. I, a 28-year-old female, live in a small, seemingly safe, but not so aesthetically nice subdivision. My partner, 30 and male, works in law enforcement, so I am home alone many nights throughout the week. Now, a few months ago, we adopted a small dog, and since I work remotely, I frequently take our dog on walks throughout the neighborhood for exercise and to help with potty training. We've lived in the neighborhood several years, but normally we don't walk the neighborhood much, so we don't really know many of our neighbors. Now that I go outside more, I'm beginning to meet more of our neighbors, which is nice. Usually it's a simple like hello in passing, but there are a few neighbors I now speak to pretty frequently. Everyone seems harmless and friendly. Well, except for this one neighbor who I'll refer to as Bob. He's approximately 50 and male. One day, I was walking my dog, and as I passed Bob doing yard work, he stopped me and said what a cute dog I had. He went on to tell me about his time in the military, training bite dogs, how he was shot and had remnants even behind his heart, etc. And while odd, it seemed friendly enough, I suppose. What I thought was going to be a 5-minute conversation, though, turned into 90 minutes of me smiling, politely nodding, and slowly backing away. I'm going to try my best to retell the conversation from memory, but it's hard because Bob was all over the place, and his stories were not cohesive at all. While specific, they were very over the top and embellished as well. Because of this, I won't give too many details for identity reasons. But essentially, he went on to talk about how rich and important he is, along with his family, yet he lives in a mobile home. He said that he's so important that he's had every presidential cabinet on speed dial, that the government has flown him around the world on Apaches to do top-secret missions, that his family had gotten away with murder and it's been swept under the rug by the government, that even Googling his name would have the authorities sent to your door for questioning. He said that he used to be in construction and did masonry work for a bunch of celebrities and still hangs out with a lot of them. He said that he speaks 7 languages, has a black belt in martial arts, and wrestles alligators. He asked me to feel his arm muscle and lifted up his shirt to show me his scars. I could literally go on and on about all the crazy and incoherent things that he said. At this point, I chalked it up to the ramblings of someone not mentally okay. It took a turn though when he asked, "Your old man is the cop that lives down the street, right?" I wish that I wouldn't have made the mistake of saying yes. As a woman, it can be hard to set boundaries with people like this for fear of confrontation or things escalating. But Bob proceeds to tell me how his son, who turns out went to high school with my partner and my partner, really don't get along. He said that he thinks that it has something to do with my partner and his son's baby mama, as Bob puts it. For context though, my partner and I are high school sweethearts, and we never really spoke to Bob's son as he was in a different grade than us, and we certainly haven't spoken to him since graduating. Neither of us know the mother of the child, but Bob also started making comments on my hair. It's red, which is often fetishized, but he asked me to take my sunglasses off so that he could see my eyes. He then said that I reminded him of an old neighbor that he used to have, and he also said that I reminded him of his daughter. He kept saying that you're a pretty girl and that I reminded him of his daughter. He then proceeds to tell me about all the hot women that he's slept with and how he's been to court for over 50 paternity tests and wants to know if he might be my dad. I'm not originally from this area, and my parents have been together 33 years. No way Bob is my dad at all. I'm sure that I'm leaving a bunch of stuff out, but you get the gist, right? I finally was able to make a break for it, finished my walk, and I instantly headed home. This was about 3 weeks ago, and I no longer go for walks with my dog. I take him to a park or a friend's house instead. But since then, Bob has come to my house and knocked on my door 3 times. The last time being today. I obviously did not answer the door all 3 times. The past 2 times my partner was not home, and today my partner was sleeping. He's a night shift worker. And quite honestly, I'm a little bit freaked out and not sure what to do. My plan was to keep ignoring him, but I'm afraid that it's going to escalate or I'll run into him outside since I still haven't taken my dog out to go to the bathroom. My mum wants my partner to go talk to Bob to see what his problem is or what he wants. Personally though, I think that that's a bit of a bad idea. But what makes this really creepy is that I looked him up on the county's clerk of court's website, and he has a very long rap sheet dating all the way back to the 80s to the present day. It started off with traffic infractions, careless driving, running stop signs, etc., but quickly escalated to possession and dealing of meth and cocaine, several charges in fact, charges of soliciting prostitution, 2 charges of kidnapping, and tons of battery charges, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, grand theft of firearms, burglary with a firearm, domestic violence, violation of a protection order, and that's all I saw before I genuinely just had to stop. I even thought maybe I was looking at the wrong person, but I confirmed the full name and date of birth, so it's definitely him. I'm going to do some more digging, but please do let me know what you guys think. Do you think that I should do something about this? Do you think that we should confront him? He's obviously mentally unstable, but do I really have something to worry about? Or should I just let this go and get on with my life? This happened in 2005 when I was 4 years old. So my dad was working far away and there was only my mum and me. She said that she was going to buy some food and to open the door to nobody. So I kept watching the TV. I was sitting on the ground and I had the door at my back. We had no actual door there. It was like the shape of the place where a door was supposed to be, but just without one. A door frame, in other words. While watching the TV, I heard my mum close the front door, then get on her bike, turn it on, and I remember listening to the sound of her bike going away, being harder to hear it as time went on until I couldn't hear it anymore. After what I guess was a few minutes, I'd be lying if I said how much time I knew actually passed, I started feeling this coldness. This has been a reoccurring experience through my life as well, which starts in my arms and feet, and for some reason it sort of made me look at my back. And when I did, there she was. This grown woman with exactly my mum's face looking at me, with no expression other than an exaggerated smile while staring at me with those black eyes. She only moved her head a bit while looking at me, and for some reason she kept outside of the room, like the place where the door is supposed to be was stopping her from coming in. I said to her, "Mummy," but there was no reaction. "Hello?" I got nothing from her, just that strange stare and that smile. As she didn't answer, I looked away from her and I just went back to watching TV. Yes, I gave my back to whatever that thing was. And after a few minutes, I would guess, I looked back again, but she was gone. That's when I began hearing my mother's bike again as she was coming back. And then I heard the front door opening and I rushed to her and said, "Mummy, why didn't you say hi before?" She had no idea what I was talking about, obviously, but I can tell you that whatever that thing was, it was definitely not her. I don't remember if that thing had the same clothes as my mum or not, but when my mum came back, the cold disappeared. It is one of the most vivid memories I have from childhood, and I'm wondering, what was that thing? And also, why didn't it ever come in? I was baptized and I would go to church on Sunday. I would pray to God before going to sleep every night that my whole family would be protected. So did that protect me from whatever that was? I really don't know. It's an absolute guess, but genuinely, it's the best thing that I've been able to come up with. So I don't particularly believe in the paranormal. I've had a small number of experiences, of course, that could possibly fall into the category of paranormal, or maybe just a vivid imagination. But this experience in particular happened a little over 5 years ago, and I think it will stick with me for the rest of my life. My ex and I were probably some of the most hard-headed people that you could meet, and this hard-headedness led to us deciding that we should construct our own house with very little help from subcontractors. The property we decided on had a unique history. It was owned in the early 1900s by quite a famous circus owner. On on the property once had a hotel, a water tower, and a fountain. Only a fountain and basement of the hotel remained. The property was divided into 4 pieces, and we purchased a piece that only had pillars and a concrete walk hidden in the woods. It was flat, high and dry, and most importantly, cheap. It was everything we were looking for. Now, during the construction of our home, we bought a small camper to live in on the property because who wants to pay rent, right? Definitely not us. We constructed the house, hired a plumber to do the plumbing, and decided to take it upon ourselves to dig for the underground power without aid of the power company. Instead, we dragged along our younger brothers with pizza, beer, and a little bit of pay. We were all working far into the night as the trencher that we rented, it didn't quite go deep enough, so we resorted to hand digging the last few inches along the 200 feet to the power pole. Since the plumbing worked in the house, we tried our best to use the toilet inside to minimize the amount of waste in our camper tank. We were definitely not fans of cleaning that thing out. I had to pee really bad, so I left the group of guys huddled over the trench digging and ran into the dark house. I didn't bring a phone or a flashlight, just my body. I left the front door open to allow for light to come through from the lights that we had illuminating our work area. I sat down and did my thing, only for the front door, to slowly close. I sort of froze on the toilet as I was completely shrouded in darkness. "I'm in here peeing," I called out, thinking that it was one of the guys. There was no response. All I could hear were footsteps coming toward the bathroom. "It isn't funny," I yelled, thinking surely it must be my ex pulling a prank on me. The footsteps, though, they grew closer and stopped right in front of the open bathroom door. "Stop, please. I don't like it. It's not funny," I pleaded, feeling my heartbeat hard against my chest. "D, stop, for real." And it was then that I could hear what sounded like a soft chuckle from outside the door. Furious and scared, I threw the toilet paper roll. It hit nothing but the floor. "D, please, just stop. You're really scaring me." Nothing. Not a single response. I hurriedly pulled up my pants and stood near the toilet, fear gripping my chest. There was no way that I was walking out of that bathroom at that point. No way. So I didn't. We had a small bathroom window, a bit off the ground, and I climbed out of it as fast as I could. I scraped my arm on the brick getting through, but I didn't care a bit. I ran around the dark side of the house to where the boys worked in the light, and I saw them all there intently working on the trench. "That wasn't funny, D," I said, tears still stinging my eyes and my chest aching. "Well, what wasn't?" he asked, looking up from where he was kneeled over digging. And I could tell in that moment, when they all looked at me, that he was telling the truth and that they were oblivious. So, who closed the door so quiet and methodically like that? Whose footsteps did I hear? Was the soft chuckle my imagination? Following that incident, we completed the house and finally moved in. Our front door would lock us out unexpectedly and for seemingly no reason, despite us changing the lock multiple times. We ended up keeping a spare key outside after being locked out one night with no phones or keys. I awoke from my sleep to find a dark figure standing at the edge of our bed one night. We heard someone whistling a soft tune when we had a bonfire in the middle of the night, and the combination of all of it makes me now lean towards something being there on that property. But the skeptic in me still really loves to deny it. One year ago, around this time, I was bored and scrolling the web, nothing unusual for me, when I decided to go on Omegle. Omegle was a now shut down website that allowed you to talk to strangers via video or text chat. It was around for a long time, and I used it frequently when I was younger as a bit of a time waster. There were plenty of creeps on there, sure, but I've had an equal amount of pleasant interactions and conversations on the site too. On Omegle, you could type in tags as well, basically keywords that describe the type of conversation or person you're looking for, and you would match someone with the same ones. I always used alt for alternative. I feel like it weeded out a lot of rude people, I suppose, and connected me to more people my age. For reference too, I was 19 at the time. So, I connected with someone who called himself Kane, and we started chatting via text. He said that he was 23, and I said my age back. We exchanged some small talk, and before I knew it, we were pretty much talking all night. All night in fact. We lived in the same time zone, you see, and I had stayed up until 6 a.m. chatting about philosophy and life and our interests, just because he was entertaining and I was having fun. When we were talking about our general areas that we live in, he then said abruptly, we should meet up sometime. I laughed initially, but it turns out that he was actually serious, and it also turns out that we only lived like 3 to 4 hours away from each other, so he was really considering this. I am an anxiety-ridden person though, but for whatever reason I thought that he might be normal due to the fact that I'd just spent hours and hours talking to him, and I didn't pick up on any red flags. So I said, sure, why the heck not? I know, this is an incredibly stupid mistake. I have a big heart though, and frequently make the mistake of giving others the benefit of the doubt. So, just like that, we started planning a camping trip. He was set on doing it just days after that morning because that was when he was off work next. I agreed because I didn't have anything to do at the time. I asked for his number so that we could talk somewhere else other than Omegle about the trip. He gave it to me and I texted it, and noticed that the message showed green on my iPhone. This indicated that he was using a Samsung or an Android. Teasingly, I said something along the lines of, "What's up with the Samsung?" After a few minutes, he texted back, saying that he had 2 phones and that one was for work. That was the first red flag that went off in my head. Why would he need 2 phones for work at his age? Of course, there's possible reasons, I suppose, but it just set off that intuitive feeling, I guess. One that I regret not listening to in the end. I asked what the job was, and he said that he worked for the state. He added that he isn't allowed to share details about his job because he signed papers saying that he wouldn't, and that he could get fired if he were to violate his agreement. I was still wary of this, but I just figured that he must have worked for a police station or the town council or something to do with law enforcement or something, and that I was probably just overthinking it. Well, days passed and the date for our camping trip approached quickly. He wanted to take me someplace close to where he lives, near a mountain in New York. By the way, don't worry, this isn't near my actual house at all. Obviously, I wanted to do at least a little research about where I was going, so I popped the name into Google. A bunch of results popped up about the soil on the mountain being contaminated with arsenic due to the old mines in the area. All of the government and the state articles that I read said that it was still safe to hike there, and that you should wash your skin and shoes after hiking. I still had a feeling of unease about the whole thing, I guess. I texted Kane and asked him why we were going to some place that could potentially be dangerous. He assured me that nothing would happen, and said that he chose the spot because it's somewhere him and his friends frequently camp. This slightly reassured me, I suppose. He does know the area better than me, after all. Now, my parents are definitely over-suspicious of everyone. Strict is also a safe word. For good reason, though. They're just protective, I guess. So I told them that I was meeting up with a friend that I'd met over a video game, and that I'd already known him for a month. I knew this would be less likely to freak them out than the truth, and they were adamant that this was a horrible idea, but finally let me go off when Kane pulled into my driveway. He didn't come inside, and waited outside of his car for me. After a brief introduction, my mum rushed out to meet him and asked a few questions about the area that we were headed to, and then we were off. We pulled into the Starbucks by my house so that he could get a coffee, since he was tired from the drive up there. We sat in his car for about maybe an hour and a half afterwards, and during that time he asked me to rate the playlist that he put on, and showed me how he writes down every single song that he likes in a little notebook that he kept in his car. I thought that was a bit weird, but kind of sweet as well. Like, what guy these days writes down songs, right? After an hour or so passed, though, I told him that we should get going so that we can get to the campsite before dark. He kept saying just 5 more minutes, though, and after about 30 minutes of insisting that we need to leave to make it on time, he finally let us start on the road. While we drove the 4 hours up to our destination, Kane mostly talked about himself. He told me long stories about his friends and a girl that he used to date that he doesn't like. I thought that this was a bit strange. Who talks about another woman to a girl like this? After telling stories for about 2 hours, I tried to deviate to a brighter topic and ask what kind of things that he's into, hobby-wise. I already knew the stuff that he told me online, but I was trying not to suffer from awkward silence or any more of his weird ramblings. He said that he thinks that eating healthy is important, and that people who eat junk food are stupid. He also says that he only wears sustainable clothing that's made from cotton or wool. I don't have a problem with being sustainable at all, but he was saying it in a really sort of, obnoxious way, I guess. Then he turned to me and asked the first question about me since we had gotten into the car. What brought you to Omegle? I told him that I was bored and that I like meeting new and interesting people, and that was about it. He nodded slowly in thought and grinned, showing the most expression that I've seen on his face so far. He said that he likes to go on Omegle and tell people that he's a soldier in Russia, and that he was torturing people as he spoke to them. I sat there in silence and just kind of stared at him, waiting for him to say that he was just kidding, and that it was just some sort of messed up humor. But he didn't. He just laughed and said, "What?" Well, as we neared the campsite, I mentioned that I was getting kind of hungry. He said that we can stop at Whole Foods before going to camp for the night. In my head, I sighed about this, knowing that he was probably going to judge me for whatever I picked out there, but it wasn't a problem for me and I was hungry, so I agreed. In Whole Foods, he made me pay for both of our meals because his card wouldn't work there. He didn't even try, in fact. This annoyed me, I'll admit, but I was just eager to get to camp, so I paid and we sat down outside to eat. After about maybe an hour, we were finally ready to get to camp, so we drive up the mountain and he pulls into a small parking area with about 3 spots. Cars were parked there and older men were surrounding the car smoking some weed. Nothing they were doing was wrong, at least morally, to me. But it just made me uncomfortable that they were there so late at night. Before I could even mention it though, Kane says that it's too cold for him to carry our supplies to the campsite, which was about a 10-minute walk, and set up camp. I was taken aback by this. I said, "What do you mean? I'll help you. We didn't come up here for nothing." He insisted though and told me to get out of the car and to feel how cold it was. He said it would take a while to pitch our tent and that it was too much for us. Now, there was no way that I was getting out of the car and facing the men in the parking spot next to us, so I rolled down the window halfway and stuck my hand out. It was freezing, he was right about that. That night it was in the 30s and the wind chill felt worse being higher up. I was annoyed though, but I agreed in the end to sleeping in his car for the night. I was sad that our trip was basically wasted, to be honest, but it was the best that we could do. He sat in silence for a while, seemingly uncomfortable that I was annoyed and unsure how to comfort me. I slinked back into the passenger seat and started to scroll on social media, just trying to pass the time. He grabbed my phone out of my hand and said, "Come here." He patted his lap. I was already annoyed at the situation and confused on what he thought he was doing. I said, "You're funny," and reached for my phone that he had tossed onto the floor of the car. Before I could get to it though, he reached over and scooped me out of my seat and tossed me onto the back seat. Now, I don't remember most of it, but my eyes were squeezed shut and I was just praying for it to end. After he was done, he pushed me back into the seats and got dressed. He smiled at me and said, "How was it?" I just stared back at him with tears in my eyes. He climbed back into the front seat, propped his feet up on the wheel, and then he just went to sleep. I didn't know what to do. I sat there motionless in the back seat for about 2 hours trying to process what had just happened to me. I considered calling my mum, calling 911. I thought about it for what felt like forever. I already had been assaulted once in my life, and it broke my parents' hearts. I knew that learning of this would absolutely destroy them, and I was also afraid of what would happen if I actually told them. Like, I didn't want my dad or my brother to go to jail for life because they were angry and got revenge against this guy. So I just sat there all night, watching the men outside stare into the car and smoke on their joints. I don't remember falling asleep, but eventually I woke up to the wind hitting the car. I was in a fetal position, sitting upright, holding my legs in my arms. Kane noticed that I was awake and said that it was time to go. I was actually scared of him, and it felt like my heart was leaping out of my throat. Adrenaline was pumping through my body, and I started scanning the back seat and our overnight bags for something that I could use as a weapon in case he were to pursue me again. I ended up holding onto my full metal water bottle, and it wasn't deadly by any means, but it could knock someone out, and holding it made me feel safer. That much was for sure. I stayed in the back and Kane started driving. I asked where we were going, and he said to get breakfast. Almost as if that was obvious, and it was silly of me to ask. After driving down the mountain back into the city, we pulled into a parking garage, and he tells me to get out, that we're here. I get out of the car and cling close to it, not wanting to let him get behind me. I was thinking about making a run for it, honestly, but didn't want to risk getting chased and overpowered by him again. I followed him to a little Mexican spot on the corner, and he told me to order pancakes so that he could have some. This obviously ticked me off even more than I already was, but I didn't say anything because I was afraid that there would be consequences if I showed negative emotions at this point. I ate a few bites of my food, and he happily ate the rest of my plate. He paid quickly with cash and took me back to the car, where he lay down in the back seat. He said that he was going to take a nap because he didn't sleep well last night. I didn't want to argue with him, so I let him sleep. And he slept for about 3 hours. The whole time I was watching YouTube videos trying to calm myself down and keep a clear head. It was about 9 a.m. and around this time my mum was waking up and texted me saying that she wants me to be home. I told her that Kane was taking a nap and that I would be home soon. She didn't like the sound of that and insisted that I come home now. I was happy to have a reason to get the heck out of there, to be honest, one that might be convincing to Kane too. So I woke him up and he became angry with me, saying, "Don't wake me up next time. Play on your phone, watch TikTok or something." I was shaking, but I managed to say that my mum wanted me home and that we needed to go. He said to let him sleep for 30 more minutes and told me to set a timer on my phone, and so I did. 30 minutes, though, felt like 30 hours, and once it went off, I woke him up once again. This time, I filmed myself waking him up because I was afraid of what was going to happen. He was angry once again, and I told him that 30 minutes was up. I asked to leave, begged him to leave in the end, and he said no. Over and over, he said that we weren't leaving yet. I was now shaking uncontrollably, but I put on a brave face and pretended like I was being playful. I said, "Okay, I'll just get an Uber then." I turned around and started to open the car door when I felt his hand grab my shoulder and dig into it, yanking me back into my place. I honestly think that I blacked out from fear for a few seconds. He said, "What the heck are you doing?" His hand was still on my shoulder, his fingers squeezing into my skin. My mind was racing and I was on the verge of tears. This caught his eye and I quickly played it off by saying that my mum would call the police to come and get me if I wasn't home soon. I had mentioned earlier that my dad works in law enforcement, so this was a little bit more believable of a lie, I guess. And at the mention of police, something changed in his face. He looked frantic. He let go of me and unhappily agreed to drive me home. I felt a deep relief, the deepest relief that I've ever felt, and swallowed the lump in my throat as he climbed into the front seat and started our 5-hour drive back to my house. The drive back was much quieter than the drive up. I didn't say anything unless he initiated. I just gripped my phone in my hand and tried not to make eye contact with him. I wondered if he had any remorse for what he did in those moments. When we reached the town where I live, it was about 11:30 at night. Kane pulled into the main strip to get to my house, and I saw flashing lights behind me. Honestly, my first instinct was to be scared because my dad is a cop, and so I've always made extra sure not to break any traffic rules. The police pulled us over though, and 2 men stepped out of the cop car. I frantically rolled down my window so that they could see my familiar face, the daughter of their boss. One of them greeted me and looked both concerned and disappointed that I was in the car with someone getting pulled over. The other cop told Kane to get out of the car while I explained what we were doing out so late. Obviously, I spared the illegal and horrific details. I was tired, scared, and I needed to be safe in my own home. I also didn't want them waking up my sleeping dad with such bad news. I overheard the second officer ask Kane about his information though when he said, "What's your name, son?" Kane mumbled something and he said to speak up. The name that he gave was not Kane though, and he told the officer that he was 22, not 23. My heart sank into my feet and I sat there motionless while they explained to Kane that he had missed a stop sign and that they were letting him off with a warning. They told me to get home and I nodded my head. When we pulled off, I let my emotions take over and I started screaming at the stranger that I was sitting next to. "Why did you lie to me? What is wrong with you?" He looked distressed from the volume of my yelling and told me to calm down, that he was sorry that he lied. He said that he only lied about his identity for his own safety. That honestly baffled me, considering that he had just assaulted me. I screamed at him all the way to my house, and as we pulled in, I threw the car doors open and started throwing my stuff out onto the lawn, desperate to just get far away from him now. He tried to talk to me, to offer more pitiful excuses for his disgusting actions, but I screamed at him to get away from me and that I never wanted to see him again. I gathered my stuff off the lawn and hauled it into my room while my parents slept soundly, unaware of the terrible secret that I had. I eventually woke my mother up and told her that I was home as she had requested. Once I got to my room, though, I just broke down. What happened to me was starting to sink in. As I was sobbing silently into my blanket, my phone lit up from a text from Kane, and it read, "I'm sorry about what happened, I really am. If it makes you feel any better, I just got pulled over, so that's my karma, I guess. Let me know if you want to talk." I felt a wave of nausea hit me like a train. I screenshotted the message, blocked his number, and deleted his contact. And I haven't heard from him since then. In fact, I haven't hung out with anyone since then besides my boyfriend, who, thank God, is normal. I still think about what happened almost every day, though, and I still feel sick when someone I don't know gets too close to me, even if it's just a stranger passing by in the grocery store. I know that what happened was the product of my own irrational teenage actions. I get that. I know that I shouldn't have met up with someone that I didn't know, but I had faith that he would be a normal person, somewhat at least. I wish that I could have listened to my instinct and to my parents' warnings. I still don't know what would have happened if I didn't make up that police story, and to be honest, I really don't want to even think about that. I'll never meet up with someone again that I don't know, though, and while trying to cope with what had happened to me, I eventually Googled the mountain again, and I found a link that said Cane Mountain North Trail Loop, New York. Now, if you've made it this far, or you're taking anything away from this story, then please let it be this. Trust your instincts and trust your gut. If something feels wrong, then it probably is. And obviously, don't meet up with strangers, no matter how good they look, or how normal they may seem. When I was a kid, we lived in a small, isolated house on the edge of a half-developed neighborhood. There were only about 6 houses on our block, and ours was the last one before many overgrown weeds and empty land stretched out into the dark. At night, the area was deserted, and you'd rarely see anyone stepping outside. I lived there from the ages of 7 to 13, and looking back, it felt like I was trapped inside one of those disturbing, uncanny horror films where reality always seems just a little bit off. Now, before I dive into the incidents, it's worth mentioning that our life in that house was filled with a sense of suffocating dread. Financially, we struggled a lot during those years, drowning in debt. Strangely enough, things turned around for us as soon as we moved out. Family fights erupted daily, and I remember feeling terrified constantly. I remember not going too far into any room so that if anything jumps out, I could run through the door easily. I don't know why I did that, to be honest, but it's just how I felt. But here are some of the events that made me believe that something was definitely haunting us. So, I remember staying home from school one day because I was sick. I was curled up on the couch watching Barney and Friends, trying to distract myself from the eerie feeling of the house. At some point, I felt someone standing beside me though. I assumed it was my mum joining me to watch the show, so I didn't think much of it. A few minutes passed and I casually asked her something. There was no response. I asked her one more time and there was no response again, so I turned around to find that nobody was there. But that was when it hit me. My mum wasn't even home and she had left for work hours ago, and I was completely alone in that house. This freaked me out and I opened the front door and sat on the porch until my parents came home because it just felt that real. It felt like someone was actually there right next to me. This next incident happened to my sister, but I'll explain it from my perspective. We all used to sleep in the same room since our house only had one bedroom, and me and my sister would sleep in between my parents to feel safe. One night, my sister was studying for her test in the living room, and maybe around 12:30 in the morning, I was starting to fall asleep when suddenly my sister busts through the door running and jumped onto the bed scared and was crying. After calming her down, she told us what had happened to her. Apparently she was in the living room studying for a test when, out of nowhere, a yellow ball with a smiley face on it rolled to the hallway from the other room, and as it came to a stop, dozens of cockroaches scurried out from the same room, like they do when they hear humans walking. Our house had a serious cockroach problem, by the way. The floors practically came alive with them at night. She said, though, that a heavy sense of dread washed over her as she stared into that dark hallway. Then she saw it, a shadowy figure emerging from the darkness, moving in a way that made her feel cold all over. She also told us that she felt stuck for a second and froze in fear before she ran into the bedroom, and that's when we met her. On another occasion, one morning, my dad couldn't find his glasses. He had recently undergone cataract surgery, so they were pretty essential. The whole family spent what felt like hours and hours scouring every inch of that house. We checked his shelf multiple times, which was where he usually kept them, but they were just nowhere to be found. Eventually, we left for school defeated and convinced that the glasses were gone for good. But later that evening, as we were sitting around, my dad suddenly called out to my mum, sounding almost angry. We rushed over to find the glasses sitting right there on the shelf, exactly where we had checked over and over again. My dad thought that we were playing a prank on him, but I can assure you that we weren't. Really, there was just no explanation for how they could have reappeared like that, and it wasn't him pranking us either because he was so mad that day. Now, this next one is actually pretty scary. How would you feel if a random creepy-looking guy stood in front of your house and just started chanting? Well, in South Indian culture, there is such a figure. I've not heard much about them, but they are like devotees of God who roam the streets and just sort of randomly tell fortunes to people, but most people avoid them, fearing that his predictions might bring misfortune. My first encounter with one of them, though, was when I was young. I remember hearing a man singing some kind of a religious song near our doorstep, like literally a few meters away from our door. And so obviously I went to check on it, but my mum quickly grabbed me from the back and told me to be silent and to not make any sound. We pretended like there was nobody home, and eventually he must have gone away. But I was really confused and asked my mum who he was, but she didn't explain and just sort of brushed it off. Well, years later, as the strange happenings in our house grew more intense, a similar figure began appearing near our house while my dad was home alone. For several days, this man stood near our door chanting and seemingly delivering cryptic messages at night. Finally, my dad confronted him, telling him to stay away. I never did see that man again after that, but I just couldn't shake the feeling that his presence was somehow connected to the disturbances going on in this place. My sister also had recurring nightmares while we lived there. She remembers one in particular, though, that absolutely terrified her. She would wake up to a vivid vision of a figure, like a yogi or a mystic, sitting on her chest, chanting in an unknown language. She could feel his weight pressing down on her, making it almost impossible to breathe. This vision plagued her as well until we left that house for good. We eventually moved out of that place, and to our relief, the strange experiences almost entirely stopped. Our financial situation improved, the family conflicts became less frequent, and that constant creeping fear seemed to finally lift. I cannot explain what was happening in that house, but living there always felt like I was stuck in a disturbing horror film, one that I desperately wanted to escape. So, my question for all of you guys is, what do you think? Was this place haunted, or was it just the atmosphere of that place getting to us? There are some more stories from that place, and if you would like to hear them, then I'm okay with sharing them, I suppose. So do let me know, because there are plenty more. My great-grandfather homesteaded in Alaska before all the housing developments and heavy traffic came in. Used to be a really quiet area, very swampy, super cold in winter. You'd walk through the swamp and hit patches not quite frozen all the way through, even in the deepest part of winter. Now, obviously, that in and of itself isn't unusual. Running water doesn't always freeze. It's a geological active area too, like there's reasons for that. However, my great-grandfather spent time in Ireland before settling in Alaska, and he liked to tell how when he was there, he rescued a pair of fairies and made a pact with them, in exchange for being able to see things nobody else could. He'd apparently take them with him and provide alcohol to their liking. When he settled in the homestead, he liked to tell this story, that he brought the fairies with him. And so long as they had a drop of alcohol and good company in the cold winter, there they would stay. Now, we did see something on occasion at the swamp, not just as kids too, but even as adults. They looked like fireflies or a ball of light, mostly in white, but you'd see one in red or blue now and again. Not like slightly red or slightly blue, like red M&M or blue M&M sort of color, but glowing type of red or blue. We also saw them inside the cabin a couple of times. Sometimes they would follow you or collect nearby while we were chopping firewood, but not always. The red one was almost always around when someone got hurt though. We were all fairly convinced that it made bad things happen. I'm not sure if people outside of our family saw them, but I do know everyone within my immediate family had at least a handful of direct experiences with them, and at least one negative experience with the red light, or fairy as my family's always called it. The cabin had a sort of lodge-style design, I suppose. The rooms were lofted and to either side of the living room, kind of like in hotels, where there's an open middle section, banisters surrounded it, with rooms on opposite sides. And while none of that really matters all that much, except that from upstairs, you could see either side of the wall dividing the kitchen and the sunroom, and On more than one occasion, you would see these little balls of light hit the wall and just keep going out the other side. You would also hear whistling sometimes, kind of an echo of what my great-grandfather sounded like when he was drinking, and as he liked to say, chatting with the fairies in his putter room. It would happen when you were in the swamp as well and in the house, and when you were the only one on the property at all. The homestead burned down shortly after my great-grandfather passed away, maybe 7 years ago, and so far, nobody is in a hurry to rebuild there. I do wonder sometimes, though, if the lights are still out there or the whistling, but I'm really not in any rush to go and find out. Mainly because, I don't know, something tells me that they're not fairies. This happened last night, and I'm still pretty freaked out about it. We're up at my father-in-law's for Christmas. He lives in South Jersey, in a pretty remote area just north of Bern State Forest. It's quiet and always a little eerie, but felt especially weird with the overcast weather and unseasonable warmth of the last few days. We did Christmas dinner at my brother-in-law's and got back pretty late. Because of the radiator heat and outside temps, we slept with the window open that night. I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, and as I was drifting back to sleep, I heard a low wail, building in volume for a few seconds before stopping abruptly. I figured that it was just an odd-sounding bird and tried to go back to sleep. It happened twice more over the course of about 5 minutes, though. I was basically able to put it out of my head and start drifting back to sleep when I heard a loud, shrill blast like a two-high elephant's trumpet. At this point, I shot up, heart racing. I knew that I had to close the window, and it took a bit to build up to it. When I dragged myself out of bed, I peeked through the shutters before I reached to shut the pane, and whatever it was had tripped a motion sensor light at the back of the property and was now half illuminated, standing maybe 100 feet from the back door, right at the tree line. It was cloaked, with its head partially shrouded. The bottom of its face looked flat and round like the back of a dinner plate, with another smaller, half-uncovered black circle at its center. It was humanoid, and that was enough for me. I immediately slammed the window shut, and it didn't move, just stood there with its face tilted towards the window. I shut the blinds and crept back into bed, and basically hid until the sun came up. I didn't hear any more sounds after that. I dared another look out of the window after dawn, and the figure was now gone. I managed to drift back to sleep for a few hours after that too. So, has anyone seen anything like this or know what it might be? I'm frantically Googling, but nothing is really coming up. I don't know what it is. I've lived in the same house for the last 18 years, and it's only gotten worse too. I live in an old coal mining town in Pennsylvania. I know that my house is haunted, but I believe that to be beside the point. Something is stalking my family. The first encounter I had was in the early 2010s. I heard my name being called repeatedly from far away, and it sounded like my friend. Started walking towards home and turned because I felt like I was being watched. I saw a dark humanoid figure that was at least 7 or 8 feet tall, and upon seeing it, I ran home. Things were fairly quiet as far as I can remember up until the last few years, but recently things have been amping up a lot. It started as rustling in the woods and the feeling of being watched. Next came the deer. So many deer. There was one too that I recall seeing multiple times in the same spot for a few days on my way home that just didn't look right. The most recent encounters has left me researching what to do. You see, 2 nights ago, my mum saw a pale white face with glowing eyes pressed up against the front door. She said that she froze in fear and didn't know what to do. Tonight, I got home after dark and walked toward my house. Seconds after I locked my car, I heard a blood-curdling scream come from the train tracks, followed by a very calm voice yelling "help me" very loudly. I froze in fear for a solid 15 seconds, just listening. I slowly walked up my porch steps, just listening to 2 different voices screaming at once, one frantic and screeching, while the other was calm and just called out for help. I yelled in the front door for my mum because the frantic voice sounded vaguely like my younger sister, but I thought maybe she was messing around. When she came outside, it grew quiet and the frantic voice had stopped. We then heard "help me" 1 or 2 more times, faintly, but then nothing. My sister, she was at a friend's house, and so it was definitely not her. We went to pick up dinner, and there were deer everywhere again. Now, this isn't completely uncommon for PA to see a ton of deer, but like I said before, these ones were weird. They stared right at you, and they never ran from the car at all, even if they were in the middle of the road too. So, someone, please help me and tell me what the heck is going on. What are these things? I have no idea what to do. The last month has been filled with fear and paranoia. You see, I had this incident around a month back. I don't know what the time in the night was that this happened, but I'm certain that it was in the AM. I just woke up with this feeling of dread and fear. My room was lit in a dark blue from my LED lights. Near the door to my room stood my mum. I called out to her quietly. As she approached the foot of my bed slowly, it became evident that it was not my mum, only looked like her. Her head began to tilt slowly as she stared at me. I moved to the foot of my bed to kick her away, but my foot went completely through her. She then disappeared and reappeared at the side of my bed and began approaching me closer. As quickly as she appeared, she then disappeared. I told my dad about it, but he said that it was just a nightmare, so I pretend like it didn't feel real. Until that same day, my friend and I were driving around. I've always known that she was a bit of a medium, as we're both paranormal investigators. However, this really cemented this for me. You see, I didn't tell her anything about this thing's appearance, but her eyes widened and she quickly drove out of the neighborhood that we were in. She was repeating to herself, saying, "We have to get out of here." She later described exactly what was there with me in my room, from the clothes to the height. That night we went to a Catholic church and we prayed. I've been praying every night since then, and I haven't been able to have the lights off at all. Everything was quiet too for a while, until the last 5 days, because 5 nights ago, I then froze in my bed. I was laying on my stomach and I felt a hand press on my shoulder. I couldn't move, but the same sense of dread filled me. 4 nights ago, I was laying on my side when I felt something brush my hair out of my face. Once again, I couldn't move. 3 nights ago, I was laying on my side when I felt someone laying behind me. I was completely frozen in fear and dread. The last 2 nights have been sleepless, and even last night I cried to God begging for protection. So my question for all of you guys is, does anyone know what this thing is, or how I can protect myself, or maybe even get rid of it? So, I've had several supernatural experiences, and I figured that I would share some that have stood out. I worked as an officer at a prison, and Although I've moved on to a new facility, I have been an officer for the past 12 years. One of the major skills I've learned is how to retain and recall details, which helps recount events that I witness. This makes report writing much easier, and is helping me recount these events here as well. The prison I worked at was the oldest operational in my state and was built in the 1870s in an old style with a big brick wall that runs the prison's perimeter. The place has been updated over the years, but some areas that still operated had little done to them since it was built. Now, when I started, the old heads told all of us that the place was haunted, given everyone who had died over the years. Different places more than others, like the old unit that was a segregation, or what some people might know as the hole, with all the prison graffiti. I never gave it much thought because if I do not experience it, then it is just a cool story, but not confirmed. Now, I worked there for around 8 months when I first saw something strange. I was working overtime at night on what's called a one-on-one, where you have to watch a prisoner who is feeling suicidal and make sure that they don't do anything. It meant that I needed to stay up all night and check to make sure that the prisoner was breathing every 15 minutes, and I had a partner who walked by every 28 minutes, so I knew that I was awake. It was about 2 a.m. and I had just used my flashlight to illuminate the cell of the prisoner that I was watching and confirm that he was breathing. I looked down to mark the check on my clipboard and I saw movement out of the corner of my eyes. My partner had just done his round 15 minutes prior, and all the prisoners were supposed to be locked in their cells, so there shouldn't be any movement down there. I turn and see someone doing a round on the housing unit, but he isn't right. This guy is wearing a blue uniform with a Breton cap, shiny black leather belt, and has a baton in his hand. The problem is that these uniforms haven't been used by my department since the 1950s, and our uniforms are not blue. They're grey and modern, whereas this one was very much old. I watched this guy walk down the unit for maybe 5 seconds, and then I shook my head and slapped my face to make sure that I was awake. When I looked back, there was no one there anymore. The next thing that happened was roughly 2 years later during my normal shift. Now, the central building of the prison I worked in is a big room called a rotunda. It has 2 floors, but it is open, so you can see the balcony up on the top levels, and anyone who is leaving the rotunda can be seen from the opposite side, even on the balcony. The doors into the wings that branch off the balcony all have windows, and most of the rooms directly connected have windows too. It was maybe 2100, and I was going to the rotunda to complete some paperwork with a co-worker for my sergeant, which is pretty common. As we were opening the open barred gate to go into the rotunda, I looked up and I noticed that the administrative wing lights appeared to be dimmed through the window into the door. I commented to my co-worker that we would need to report that a light was out in the administrative wing. It was then that we were both looking at the window that we observed something move in the window, and we realized that this was not a light malfunction, that instead a shadow person or something like that was standing in front of the window. While we were watching this shadow move to its left and through a solid wall into another room, we saw its silhouette through the window of that room. Well, we just looked at each other and we kept going. The third experience that I was about 3 years in as an officer by the point that this one happened. I was working the third shift in the control center, which is where we use the cameras and security measures and all that. Also, I should mention that there are several rifle posts around the prisoner's perimeter that are used to ensure the security of the prison, but we only ever used like 3 of them during operational hours. In this case, it's important for you to know that when a phone is left off the hook, the phone rings into the control center so that we can address the issue. When the call rings through, you can pick up the phone and hear anything on the other end that may be being said in the area, which is important in case we're dealing with a staff assault or a hostage situation or something like that. So, I'm working as the electronic monitoring officer, which means the camera controls are my main responsibility, along with the perimeter security. As I'm working, the phone rings and the institutional caller ID says one post, which is odd because that post is not used because it's too small for a modern person to comfortably fit inside of it. Also, at this time there is nobody that should be near it, and for someone to reach it, they would have to set off at least 2 security alarms, which I was in charge of monitoring. Given the fact that the guy who was doing the perimeter checks was a bit of a prankster, I guess you could say, I figured that it was just him playing a prank and that he knew a way around the sensors somehow. So I answer the phone and all I hear is static, which is continuously increasing and decreasing in volume. Like someone has an old television on a static-filled channel and is moving the volume up and down constantly. I hang up the phone and move the camera to look at the post, and I can see right inside there that there is no one in there. As I'm looking at it, the phone rings again as an off-the-hook at one post. This time, my lieutenant picks up the phone and, after a minute, walks back to me asking if the perimeter officer is playing games, because he can hear mumbling blurred out by static from one post. He sees that I have the camera pointed at it, and that there is no one in there. The lieutenant tells me to have the perimeter officer check it because an animal may have gotten in the post and knocked the phone off the hook or something. The officer took a while to get there as he had been on the other side of the perimeter, and he had to climb 5 flights of stairs to get there. During this time, the phone has continued to ring from one post until I can see the officer opening the door, at which point the phone just stops ringing. The officer opens the door with his flashlight on and calls over the radio that there's no phone in the post. My lieutenant responds that there must be one because the calls keep coming through. In response, the officer holds up a disconnected phone line so that the camera can see it, and says that is the only thing in the post. This post has not been used since like the early 80s, I think. Like I said, it was way too small of a space. The phone would still ring now and again on the 3rd shift until we updated our phone system to an internet-based system, upon which it stopped. This next experience, I had been an officer for about 4 years at this point. I was working my regular shift as the electronic monitoring officer. I went on a restroom break, which means that I had to leave my post and go about 100 yards away to the nearest restroom. As I'm in the restroom, I distinctly hear the sound of boots clapping on the tile floor of the hallway that leads to this restroom, among other rooms in that wing. As the sound gets closer to the restroom, I can hear the large Folger keys that are clinking together on their waist as they walk. When it sounded like they were right outside the door, I called out saying, "I'll be out in a minute," and I didn't hear the sounds after I said that. Thinking that someone was waiting outside, I hurried up and washed my hands, not taking more than a few minutes. I opened the door and there was no one there. The hallway is long enough and has 3 entry doors that I would have heard open and close as well as any other door in the hallway, to where they would have had issues getting out of the hallway noiselessly in the time between me calling them and leaving the restroom. I returned to my post and I asked my sergeant if he saw anyone go into the wing while I was down there. He said that he didn't and asked why. Knowing that he was someone who believed in ghosts, given that he and I had talked about how he used to do independent paranormal investigations, I told him what happened. His face went slack and his eyes got large as he said, "Go check the video." I returned to my position and watched the video of that hallway, the hallway of the wing above that one, and the areas outside the wing. And I confirmed that no one was in that area during that time, except for me, and there were no signs of distortions or anything. Now, the final one that I'll share for today is that I had been an officer for about 6 years and was working my regular shift. I was watching the medication lines after the diner lines were done, and my sergeant was talking with me. Not like a management thing, but we were friends and just wanted to have a conversation while ensuring that prisoners weren't passing meds or fighting or worse. The medical hallway that I was watching is connected at one end to the rotunda and at the other end to one of the main housing blocks, specifically right next to our main segregation unit. As we were talking, we heard what sounded like muffled talking from a radio. Checking our radio, we realized that it was none of us, so we began searching the area around us. Given the location, there shouldn't be an unattended radio, so it was a security issue and of some concern. As we proceeded to search the area, we realized that the intercom system speaker for the segregation unit was making the sounds. This intercom, unlike a standard housing unit, is not used frequently, which is why we were surprised to find it transmitting sound. The sergeant points at it and says that it must be broken. The switch is in an off position and the activation light is off. I looked closely and I got goosebumps as I made a shocking discovery, saying, Sarge, how is it doing that when it's not plugged in? I held up the unplugged cord leading out of the intercom box and gave it a slight tug to show that it was attached directly to the box. The sergeant's face went completely white and he walked off shaking his head, just saying, "Nope," over and over again. These intercoms don't have backup batteries or anything too, and there are no direct power-up hookups or anything like that. Just the cord that I had already shown was disconnected. The sounds, though, they continued for the duration of the medication lines. I left the area after that, and I never heard of it doing that again. So, that's everything that I've experienced, but if you guys would like to hear more of the other stories that I've heard from there anyway, just let me know and I'll be sure to share some more. Thanks for listening, and if you're interested in doing a job like this, please do not let stories like this get in the way, because it really is a very fulfilling career. So this all starts with a guy named Daniel. Daniel was at one time an acquaintance of my ex-husband. He was never my favorite person, honestly, as he was kind of an incel, I guess, a lifelong drug addict, and also had a chip on his shoulder because his family had money. He was a liar, thought that he was slick, and did creepy stuff like once I came home and he was folding my clothes out of the dryer. I don't know why he thought I would approve of such, including folding my underwear into tiny little squares with a lot of care. You get it though, Daniel is a loser. And look, I know that that's mean, but he really has no redeeming qualities. Thankfully, after a while, their associate friendship runs its course and he sort of fades into obscurity as a bad memory. I hear very little concerning him for the next 10 or so years, save one thing: he has lost his mind. But that's just a throwaway statement a lot of the times. So-and-so has gone crazy and lost their mind. I had the thought that he'd always been like that, and forgot about him once again. About 2 years ago, I pull up to my house though and notice a side-by-side sport utility vehicle in my driveway that I've never seen before. When I walk in, I see this unkempt, wild-eyed looking man that appeared homeless really. I followed my husband to our room and whispered, "Who the heck is that guy?" And he looks surprised and says, It's Daniel. He's, well, sort of insane now. Apparently his family keeps him in the house mostly because he doesn't do well in public and freaks people out now. But he stole their side-by-side and drove it over an hour to our house where he has run out of gas to go back home. I instantly get a bad feeling when I see him. Before I even know it's Daniel, this guy's aura is just all wrong. His vibe is messed up, and I get even more and more wigged out the longer that he is here, because he's having a full-on conversation with, well, himself. This was sinister, and I didn't like his replies to whatever he was talking to as well. whatever was speaking to him was saying hostile things about us. For example, he listened intently, then laughed wildly and shook his head. No, they ain't like that. That is funny though. Like, what the heck, right? I'm just trying not to make him feel any type of way because I know that this may not be something that he can control or help, and I don't want to make him uncomfortable or embarrassed, but I'm getting more and more uncomfortable myself the longer this goes on. Finally, after like 20 minutes of talking to something, he sort of looks at me sheepishly and says, "I apologize, I have demons, but I'm working on that." I nod and tell him that I understand. My husband rounds up some gas by his side-by-side and then he leaves. At first, I'm really relieved because I was feeling really freaked out by the time that he bounced. When I knew that he was gone, I was sitting on my bed doing some craft project, and my husband is in the master adjoined bathroom doing something with a tool. I then quiz him. What the heck is Daniel talking to? He tells me that he believes that he's talking to demons that follow him and tell him things, and so he was speaking to a demon with a full-on conversation, at least in his mind, which heightens my bad vibe meter to the max, let me tell you. I tell him that I don't feel comfortable with him in my home. I don't want him back here where me and my children are. He's dangerous. I do pity him, but I just instinctively know that he's dark and dangerous. My husband says okay, and he doesn't think he'll be coming back anyway. Quite suddenly, though, I then feel a pain in my arm like I cannot describe. For a few moments, I really think that my husband has accidentally shot metal across the space with whatever he was doing with that buzzing Dremel tool, and he's just shot the heck out of me. I put my flat hand over the inside of my arm, below the elbow and above the wrist, and put pressure, but it doesn't stop. Intense pain, a weird pain like I've never felt before. I scream. I move my hand to look, but don't see any blood, so I couldn't have been hit with shrapnel from this tinkering or anything. But I did see sort of half-moon claw prints dug into my arm, like someone had grabbed it and just sunk their nails into it. Not scratched, just dug in. There were at least 40 to 50 between my inner wrist and inner elbow, and to my horror, I literally watched while more appeared right in front of my eyes. I yelled for my husband to come here, and I showed him my arm and asked him what it looked like to him. "Dang, who clawed you up like that?" was his response. I shook my head and said nobody, and explained what had just happened before they appeared out of, well, seemingly nowhere. What he did next sent a chill down me. Daniel didn't leave his demon here when he left, and it's clawed you up, did he? He jokingly said with a little laugh. He was kidding, but as soon as he said it, I knew that it was true. It didn't like me talking about Daniel like that, and it clawed me up to punish me. I told him not to say that, and I quietly freaked out about it until I went to bed and tried to keep it off my mind. A couple of days later, we were laying in bed and my husband was spooning me with his arm draped over my side. He had just nodded off when I felt that weird otherworldly pain in my side under his arm, and I just knew that it had clawed me again. I cried out and shook him awake in a panic, and I asked him to move his arm before raising my shirt and asking what my side looked like. He looked crazy and said it looked clawed up like my arm had, and he watched me while more claw marks sprung up until my side was covered in them. Honestly, he was pretty much as shook as I was. Well, almost. Throughout the next few months, I always felt like I was being watched too. I would randomly get this same weird type of pain, followed by some type of mark in the pained area. I basically had to exercise my house over and over. It would work for like a week or two, and then it would always come back. Not as strong, but it definitely kept coming back. Looking back, I sincerely believe that Daniel isn't just hearing voices that aren't really there. I think that the demons that he says that he talks to are exactly what he says they are. I think that the one that he dragged up into my house that night either decided I was weak and it would get to me, it saw something in me that it liked and wanted, or it sought to punish me for talking about Daniel the way that I did. Whatever the case, it was seeking only me because nothing had happened to anyone else in the house. There was also a lot of DV in our home and I was the victim of it. I think that it was feeding on the negativity in the home. I felt like it was always just on the edges, lurking or waiting to be able to get back in to get to me, and it was awful. I've since divorced and moved on, and I came to a better place spiritually. But this experience taught me that what you don't believe in, you cannot defend yourself from. And I, for one, will never make that mistake again. I'm 30 now, but this happened when I was 16, and it has just always stuck with me. I was playing some OG Paper Mario one afternoon after school, and as I was playing, I heard my mother call me from downstairs. I paused and called back, "Yeah, what's up? Come down to the office, please. I need help with something." "Okay, I'll be right there," I said as the good and helpful son that I was. I went downstairs to the office to find it empty. Confused, I went to the kitchen, my mother's bedroom, all the places that she'd normally be. I even went to the garage to find that her car wasn't even there. I went to the living room to find my father reading the paper. I asked him where Mum was, and he said that she wasn't even home yet. I stood there for a while processing that information before my dad asked what was wrong. I told him that I definitely heard Mum asking me for help in the office. He simply shrugged and said that he didn't know what to tell me, and went back to reading his paper. So, yeah, something called out to me in the voice of my mother asking for help, and my mother definitely wasn't home. The whole thing has confounded me to this day. This is going to be a little bit lengthy, as this has been an occurrence in my life over the course of the past 10 years, so I apologize for the length of this. Now, I'm a believer in the paranormal world due to other experiences, but I am also open to the fact that this could be sleep deprivation or stress induced, I guess, but the moment of times that I've dealt with this and the fact that I have been consciously awake every time, it definitely makes me wonder. I'm 30 years old now, and my first encounter began in 2012 while I was a freshman at college. I was on academic probation over a long weekend, so the rest of my roommates were gone for the weekend and I was stuck in my dorm for the weekend all by myself. One night, as I had finished my homework and was tired of mindlessly scrolling through my phone, I got unusually tired and fell asleep in my bed at around 8 p.m. with the lights on. After about 20 minutes into my snooze, I felt like I wasn't alone all of a sudden and just sort of jolted awake. Now, our beds were over our desks in a sort of bunk configuration. I rolled over and looked into the middle of the room below me and was shocked to see a humanoid figure curled up into the fetal position. I honestly thought that I was dreaming, so I just continued to blink and rub my eyes and was telling myself to wake up, but soon realized that I wasn't dreaming at all. After about 30 seconds, it seemed to register that I was staring at it, and it slowly stood up. I was in complete utter shock and I just froze. It looked just like a person, but with no face or hair features, no clothes, just humanoid opaqueness, I guess. I couldn't even discern gender. It was about 5'9" and slowly walked towards my direction. Nothing felt evil or malicious about it, but I didn't want to test that theory by any means. Unfortunately, it was between me and the door, and I had to run past it to escape my room. I yelled at it to stop approaching me. As soon as my fight or flight instinct overrode my being frozen in fear, and as it was only 3 feet away from me, I jumped from my bunk onto the floor and bolted past it. Mind you, it never reached out or interfered with my escape as I ran into the halls of my dorm with pure adrenaline and fear. With it being a weekend, there was hardly anybody present, but I cooled myself down and quickly walked to find the closest human contact that I could find. I finally found one of my friends down the hall who was still present. As to not sound insane, I didn't tell a soul of my experience. I chalked it up to being tired and stressed with school, but unfortunately, I had to eventually make my way back to my room to sleep alone again. I finally summoned the courage to leave my friend's room and go back to mine after a few hours. I entered my room and there was nothing there. I stayed awake with the lights on for the rest of the night with an uneasy feeling, but nothing else happened. Fast forward to 2013. My roommates and I had switched to a different room. Every year we had to switch rooms. Nothing else had happened until late fall, and this time all of my roommates were present, and it was a school night, and we had all just begun to fall asleep, 3 of us total. Once again I got that uneasy feeling, and once again I rolled over to find that humanoid figure standing near the head of my bed, reaching up towards me this time. I absolutely freak and wake up my roommates, who throw the light on. As soon as the light came on, it had disappeared. To my roommates' justifiable annoyance, they told me to go to sleep and that I'm just imagining things. This occurs 2 more times throughout my college years, with the last college incident occurring in my senior year. Once again, I was asleep and awoke to an uneasy feeling. I had accidentally left my closet open, and as I peered into it, I saw the figure again, just standing there staring into me. I fixate on it, just telling myself that it's just my overactive imagination. But as I was wishing it away, it stepped out of the closet, and just like the other times, it begins to approach me. I scream at it, demanding it to not take a step closer or else, and then it just disappeared into, nothingness. I then graduate and join the military. Thinking that it was just college-induced stress, I felt like the encounters would end, especially with me leaving my old dorm for my first duty station in Florida. At this point, I'm engaged to my now wife and have 2 dogs. And to shorten the now long story, the shadow people, they would continue to follow me. It didn't matter which apartment or house I would move to, I would never be able to escape the terrifying encounters of whatever these things are. It would always start with my dogs growling at our bedroom doors, and then full manifestations. My wife would awake me to shouting at something, demanding it not to come closer and to leave me and my family alone. It would absolutely freak my wife out as she could not see the figures I was confronting. Each visit, it would just get a little closer before disappearing after I confronted it. It would always get close, but it would never actually reach me. I could also sense that it was never the same shadow person, and each subsequent visit, it seemed more foreboding and with negative intent. It also had this weird sort of pull to it as well, like it was drawn to me. This happened about 4 or 5 times from 2017 to 2019, and this leads me to the final encounter that I had in 2020. My wife was pregnant with my son at the time, and I was a month out from deployment, knocking out my pre-deployment training. This last encounter was different from the rest too, and was the single most terrifying paranormal or stress-induced event that I've ever witnessed. I was asleep with my wife in my bed. I had only been asleep maybe an hour when I woke up because I couldn't breathe. I had felt 2 hands wrapped around my neck and weight on my chest. As I struggled to breathe, I saw the shadow person above me this time, and it felt like it was trying to suffocate me. I hadn't even registered it as a shadow person. I thought it was a home invader at first. I wrestled with it, or at least it felt like I was, and I could feel it and grab it this time. Once I got the upper hand, it sprung to the bedroom floor and crawled under my bed. My wife was already awake as I was thrashing about. Thinking that it was an intruder, I was trying to find a weapon and told my wife to escape the house and call the cops. She, of course, refused and told me that it was all a bad dream. I looked under the bed to find nothing there, of course. And my wife told me that I was just stressed with the upcoming deployment. I was incredibly embarrassed and utterly terrified. I saged the house just in case and tried to work on my stress. And weirdly enough, that was the last encounter, and I haven't had another one since then. Now, I know that this could all be psychological, but it doesn't take away how terrifying it is in the moment. Of note is the fact that I'm never half awake. I'm always wide awake when I went through these encounters. I don't have sleep paralysis and I don't sleepwalk. I hardly tell this story to anyone unless they're a believer in the paranormal, as I know that it sounds super made up and I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't have gone through it. I just know what I experienced and how it made me feel. Most won't believe my story, and that's fine. I'm sharing this to see if anyone else has had a similar experience with shadow people or could explain the psychological reason if there are any. I guess the only thing that would go against that psychological reasoning is the fact that my dogs, they always seem to react to it as well. This happened when I was 15 and my little sister was 12. A little bit of backstory here. We lived in this small town for several years and it was a very safe place. A few years into living there, we had a cop with his wife and kids move in 2 houses down from us. Our house was built sometime in the 1920s, I think. A few nights before this incident, our other siblings locked us out of the back door. Us being idiots, we kicked the back door in. The door didn't budge, but the frame came out of the wall and the door was just hanging there. One of our blinds were broken and we didn't have the money to fix it, seeing as my parents had 8 kids and money was really tight growing up. Anyways, the blinds were broken behind our TV. On the other side of the window was a garage and our driveway. Next to the driveway on our neighbor's property, which was abandoned and had tall shrubs. What we didn't know was that there were 2 people hiding in the shrubs, watching us. I'm going to leave a few details out to make a long story short, but if you have any questions, then please do drop them below. My little sister's name is Candace and my name is Aria. So, it was the summer of 2009. My oldest brother and his girlfriend were a mile from our house fishing about 10 at night. Fishing, right? All of our siblings and parents were asleep. Besides my older brother out with his girlfriend fishing, I was sitting in front of the TV watching it. Candace was sitting in the bed watching TV with me too, when all of a sudden Candace and I heard a very loud crash noise from the back door. We both screamed. We got up, ran to the phone and called our brother's cell phone. He said that he was on his way because his girlfriend apparently twisted her ankle. He gets home and by this point, we woke everyone up in the house and had all the lights on. My brother tells us to stay in the house. My brother is 6'4" and 300 pounds. Unknown to my family, I slipped outside to check with my brother. I know it was stupid of me to do this, but I was a curious kid. I saw my brother being really quiet. He ran back to our fenced-in backyard and he gets within arm reach of this guy and he steps on a stick. The guy turns and looks back at my brother and takes off running and hops the fence, and he got away, sadly. I unfortunately didn't see all this because I went back into the house after a while. This is just what my brother told me. But my brother comes in and he tells everyone that he saw a guy all in black and he's about 6 foot, and that's all that he saw. The rest of the night was pretty much calm, my brother on high alert though. The next night, my brother was out with his girlfriend wherever they were at the time. It was again about 10 at night. Candace and I were watching TV again in the same spot as last time. Again, we hear a loud crash coming from the back door. We screamed again and called our brother's cell phone again, and he came home again. The whole house was awake again and all the lights on. My brother goes out and checks it out, and this time he didn't see anyone out there. Oh, I forgot to mention too, both of these times, we looked at the back door, and both times the back door looked like it was kicked really hard. This time around, the frame was out of the wall more, and the door was leaning further into the house at this point. We didn't make a police report because we had a cop that lived 2 houses down from us. But while he was at work, us kids would help take care of his pregnant wife, bring her over food, play with her kids and all that. We really didn't see him much, and when we did, he was really sweet and nice, but anyways, we told the police officer what had happened. He told us that he thinks that there are 2 guys out there and that they've been stalking our house and watching us. The cop comes over and checks and looks. He said that one of the guys seems to be on lookout and hides right here in the shrubs. He keeps lookout while the other one does the possible breaking in. He said that they had to have been looking through our broken blinds. He said that at night they could be looking in and you really couldn't see anything if you were looking out. After those 2 nights, there was no attempted break-ins anymore. But fast forward to the fall of that year, and our cop neighbor told us. So, I'm not actually supposed to tell you all this, but we actually caught a peeping Tom. He's in jail now, about 20 or so miles away. And he said that after this peeping Tom got caught, that perhaps that's why everything stopped. That is, he suspected that this guy was the guy trying to break in. He said that the town was safe again because of this, and Candace and I were really freaked out and kind of scared. To this day, her and I always have our windows and doors always locked. We check multiple times a day, in fact. If any of our curtains are open, we get scared and we close the curtains every time. I'm honestly afraid that it'll happen again one day. We no longer live in that town, but that thought is definitely still there. To this day, we don't know what their intentions were, but I do think that if he would have gotten in, that there's a very good chance that we wouldn't be here today. And that is a scary thought. I was working at a small business in Iowa when a man came in for an interview. He was polite enough, but didn't really say much. But something about him just felt really off. While my boss interviewed him, I stocked shelves, listening to the man answer our standard questions. What's your availability? Have you ever been arrested? Things like that. When he left, the manager asked me what I thought. There's something weird about him. I got really bad vibes about him. The boss kind of chuckled at me and said, "We can't deny someone employment because of bad vibes." I took out my phone and Googled the guy's name, and he had been arrested a few months prior for threatening to shoot up a gas station after being accused of theft. He lied and said that he had never been arrested. Is that good enough reason to not hire someone? It was, and as it turns out, it may have actually saved my life. I remember September 2018, a beautiful clear day, the calmness broken by the sound of police cars flying down the road. A student had been murdered in the middle of the day on a nearby golf course. She had passed a group of men, who very shortly later found her things abandoned on the ground. Concerned, they called management, and shortly after, she was found, her body floating in a pond. Everybody was in shock. This was the second murder of a young student Iowa had in just a few weeks. Was it a disgruntled fellow golfer? A jealous lover? No. The young woman had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. She did not know her killer. He did not know her. He was a homeless man who was found in the woods by the golf course, saw an opportunity, and he took it. He had fantasies about these sorts of things, and the next day the story made headlines, and plastered on the front was the killer's face. My stomach turned when I saw him, because he looked just so familiar. I didn't recognize the name, but then again, I've never been good with names. But I remember stories, and so I googled his name. And the same story about a man being arrested for threatening to shoot up a gas station came up. And instantly, I knew who he was. It was the same man that I had convinced my boss not to hire. At the job, the majority of shifts there were only one or two of us working, which means that I definitely would have been alone with this guy at so many points, so many slow hours with few customers, so many blind spots. There would have been hundreds, possibly thousands of opportunities to be alone with him. It only took a few minutes for a murder to occur on a beautiful day on a golf course. So how much more opportunity would there have been if he had been hired? So yes, do trust your instincts, because if they're anything like mine, they may just save your life one day. At 4 a.m. tonight, we got back from our walk. We live in Poland, pretty much on the Czech border, and usually take a late walk. Around 2 a.m. we took our off-road vehicle into a nearby forest that we've been in many times. We parked the car and walked across a bridge to a spot that we visited in the daytime. I should also mention that there's two separate sides of this forest. We walked deeper into the woods. Surrounding us are mounds, which I think are old war trenches, based on the area's history and items that we found there before. The ground is full of dead leaves, so you could hear any movement, especially this night because the woods were completely silent. All of the grassy plants or shrubs on the ground around us looked like they'd been recently crushed, not cut down, and all facing the same direction, which was a little bit weird. It was honestly like a herd of buffalo came from on top of the mounds and just ran down and trampled them all. I assume deer did this, but as we were walking closer to the mounds to venture upwards, all of a sudden we hear this heavy thud on the ground, like a weight, maybe 60 kilos, landed approximately 5 meters away from us, closer to the mounds. We didn't see anything or hear any other movement, which was strange. So we decide that this is the time to leave. The bridge is about 20 meters away. I'm trying to move quickly. My partner is clapping and shouting in case it's a wild boar. When we get to the bridge, we're still on the same side before crossing back to the vehicle. We both stop and shine our flashlights at the forest to see if there's something there. We don't see or hear anything. But about 30 seconds later, we begin to cross the bridge, still with our flashlights pointed at the forest. But now, in a bush about 3 meters away, are two sets of round yellow eyes staring at us. The first set of eyes is maybe, like 1.5 to 2 meters from the ground, and the other set is about 1 meter from the ground. Even though we had just shined our flashlights in that exact spot, and were still in earshot of this bush, we didn't hear anything moving there. You can't even take one step there without the leaves going crunch though, so that was definitely strange. The only thing that we actually heard was the sound of the initial thud, so how did this thing move so quickly towards us without making any noise? We walked the rest of the bridge backwards while shining lights at this bush. The whole time these eyes were watching us as well. We then jumped into the vehicle and we got the heck out of there. Luckily, it didn't follow us, and whatever this was stopped, stared, and just stayed behind the bushes on the other side of the bridge. I can't tell if it was after us or if it was making sure that we left its side of the bridge or something. Initially, I thought that it was a wild boar, but I've seen them many times in my life, even at night, and these eyes didn't look the same. Plus, there was the actual size of the thing. Whatever it was huge. I really don't know how else to explain this, and there's just no other large creatures like that in this area. We will go back tomorrow in the daytime to see if there's any animal prints near that bush. But in the meantime, do you guys have any ideas as to what this could be? A few years ago, my mother died after a long battle with cancer. In her last few weeks, she was bedridden at home at one point and on heavy pain medication. The whole family took turns to help and spend time with her, and what she told us towards the end gave us all a shock. She kept having a scared reaction to something. She'd jump up and say, "Oh my goodness," or she'd swear as if something had made her jump. She didn't say anything at first, but then after a week or two, blurted out something one day that gave us all the creeps. "I wish he'd stop scaring me. Tell him to go away." She was annoyed at something, or someone to be exact. Confused, we asked her what the problem was, and she told us. Apparently, in her last few weeks, she kept seeing her deceased partner walking around the house. He'd walk down the hallway or past her bedroom door, or sometimes he'd be sitting in her room, and every time that it would happen, she would jump with fright, obviously not expecting to see him there. She was more annoyed than scared, I guess, but she'd see him several times a day, just going about his business as if he'd never left. Usually her reaction would be, "Oh, for goodness sake, go away." Not because she didn't want to see him, but because it kept making her jump. Our first thought was that it was something to do with the pain medication that she was receiving, but the nurse assured us that it wouldn't cause hallucinations or visions or anything. It absolutely terrified us to know that as well. She went into hospice a few weeks later, and it was then too that the visions stopped. Weird, huh? We still don't even talk about it either, because that's how creeped out we all are by it. I've debated sharing this for, well, a long time, but never got around to it, mainly because I try to keep this memory out of my brain. This might be a long one, but it's a creepy thing that happened to me about 4 years ago. So, for starters, I grew up in southwest Saskatchewan and moved on to my aunt's farm in 2019 to live in the other house that is on their property. The house is fairly old, but to be honest, I loved it. It wasn't long, though, after I moved in that I started to feel, I guess, uneasy in the house, alone. I would close every window when it got dark, as it felt like something was watching me through them every night. Eventually, I decided to get a puppy to keep myself company when my boyfriend at the time was at work or away from the house. It helped to have the company, but I always dreaded having to take her outside when it was dark. For a bit of scene setting, our house sat on the left side of the gravel road. At the back of the house, there was about 10 meters of backyard, and then there was the cow pasture and the cow barn. We didn't own cows, but in the summer another farmer would rent out our pasture space, and so we would have them on the property. It wasn't uncommon at night to hear coyotes around the farm either, and there were tons of them as well. Every so often when I'd go out with my puppy, we'd hear them all around us, too close for comfort as well. We had a farm dog too who would keep the coyotes away for the most part, as she was huge. But every so often she would wander elsewhere on the property to scout, and the coyotes would get a little too close. They always tried to lure my puppy out to them as well, but luckily I kept her leashed. Now, one thing you should know about my pup is that it takes her forever to find a spot to go potty. This is still a problem today, 4 years later even, but back then it was the bane of my existence. She would pace for at least 5 minutes, and that was only after finding a suitable spot. Sometimes we would be out there for like near half an hour, just so she would go, and not go in the house. Another problem of hers. Huskies, am I right? Anyway, on this particular night, it was raining pretty heavily. I was not happy to be out there, and she had decided that she wasn't going to go until she found her perfect spot. We had already been out there for 15 minutes, and at this point, she was also getting frustrated with the rain and wanted to go inside. But I wanted her to go before we went in, since we'd already been out there for so long. So, as any annoyed puppy mother would do, I started getting a little bit frustrated and would repeat, go potty, every time that she'd get distracted from her objective. It was dark, I was cold and annoyed, and to make matters worse, the cows behind us were fussing fairly loudly too. This was out of the ordinary for them. They were usually quiet and sleeping at this time of night. I was also hearing what sounded like a strange bird whistling, but shook it off as probably being an owl up in a tree somewhere. I tried to keep it out of my mind as I kept shouting and pleading, go. I was facing away from the pasture, and suddenly though, in my left ear I heard it, go. Now, one thing you should know about me is that I have a very strong flight response typically, but this froze me on the spot, as I was mostly confused at what the heck I'd just heard. I tried telling myself I didn't hear it. I tried telling myself that it was just a moo from a cow that I had heard wrong. But again, as if spoken directly behind me, I heard it again, go, go. It sounded unnatural. It was as if it came from someone who had never spoken a word before, a raspy, deep, monotone go. It almost sounded like it was coming out of an old radio. But of course, there were no radios out there. Every time that it said it, it sounded the exact same as the first time it was said, and whatever it was had started repeating it as if it had been taught its new favorite word. At this point, I spun around to the pasture to find nothing there. But then, again from behind me, in the opposite direction now, go. This had all happened in the span of about 3 seconds, and at this point, I remember shouting out loud, "All right, you don't have to tell me twice," as I picked up my little furball and made a dash for my front door. I swiftly locked both doors behind me and sat bewildered in my kitchen. Puppy went back to puppying immediately, obviously unbothered by it all, and happy mum wasn't making her stay out in the rain any longer. I picked up my phone and called my aunt, asking her if my uncle had been out in the field with the cows. She said no, and I explained to her what had just happened to me. She sent my uncle over to the pasture to check it out, but soon after told me that he hadn't seen or heard anything. He said that he checked the pasture again in the morning, but again, there was nothing. I spent my night hiding from the windows with the lights and the TV on loud enough to not hear anything outside. The next morning, when my uncle checked on the pasture, he didn't see anything out there, but what he did find was 2 calves that were dead. That explains the colossal cow panic that had ensued the night before. I regret this, but I didn't push for any more information, as I honestly just didn't want to know, but they told me other than that they didn't find anything out of the ordinary. A few months after that, and I started going to therapy for the paranoia that this had caused me. I started feeling like people were watching me, out to get me. Another few months after that, I moved out of the province for good, and finally felt safe. I'm wondering though if any of you here have any idea of what the heck this could have been. There's no chance that there would have been someone out in our field, as we were fairly far away from town and neighbors, and we have cameras that would have seen anyone enter our property. Coyotes are common, like I said, but I don't think they have a capability of mimicking words. So, do you have any ideas? Since moving, I've had some weird related things happen as well, but I'll save that for another time if you guys want to hear it. Thank you to anyone who can contribute to this, and thanks for hearing me out. To give some context, I used to be a 911 dispatcher for a small city. We dispatched all law, fire, EMS for the entire county, and within this county were multiple law agencies. I had been there for about 3 months or so when I met him. His name was Jake. Jake had recently transferred from a big department in California and landed himself randomly at our department. It didn't make much sense as to why he left California in the first place, but he always insisted that it was just time for him to move out to a smaller, less dangerous apartment. Him and I quickly became close and would chat almost every day after I got off shift. Within a few months, it became apparent that we liked each other, and our flirting progressed into something more serious. Fast forward a few months later, and it turns out that he was doing some inappropriate things to photos or videos of me whilst he was actively on duty. This and a few other things that he had kept hidden on duty led to him losing his license and leaving. During the process of his termination, his sergeant had suggested that I get a protective order against him, as he had apparently made threatening statements previously towards me, such as, "You better be telling the truth, I'll find out on Tuesday if you're lying to me," etc. I had begun to fill out the paperwork and was told that I had a temporary protective order on him in the meantime, but don't think that I ever actually did. Anyway, about 2 weeks later after his termination, he calls me to catch up. The entire call is like an old friend to an old friend. What am I doing for work? Do I have a boyfriend now? But progressively turns more personal. When does my shift end? What do I drive? Being 18 and naive, I treated him like I always had, answering his questions. I had contacted his old department afterwards, as his sergeant had told me to let him know if I was ever contacted again, but they turned me away pretty quickly and didn't want anything to do with it. So with that, I blocked Jake. Roughly a month later, I get a call from a new number, and it's Jake. Once again, he wants to meet up and catch up, but this time he so casually goes on to tell me about this new house that he's wanting to buy in my neighborhood, knowing that it's my neighborhood. I had never told him where I lived in town, let alone what specific neighborhood I lived in. During this call, he progressively got more aggressive as well, making statements such as, "If I knew that I was going to get canned, I should have just had my way with you." He half-heartedly joked about getting a hotel room just for me, and, well, that was that. A few days later, he FaceTimed me, and once again came off as simply wanting to catch up as he was sick. Midway through our seemingly normal conversation, he makes it apparent that he's been touching himself this entire time. Keep in mind, nothing suggestive was mentioned, and our conversation at that point was about his new dog. He's blocked once again, but has tried to follow my social media, and now I've started to see him in my area too. Last I knew, he lived nearly 30 to 45 minutes in the opposite direction from me. So, my question for all of you guys is, am I just reading into this, or should I genuinely consider this stalking, and if so, what should I do?